that's alright. Baby, that's all. All that I wanna do. Hey. Well, that's
It's 8:30 Mountain Time on this Tuesday morning, and thanks for joining us live on Real Talk, or heck, if you're tuning in later in the day, later in the week, later in the month, later in the year on the Real Talk podcast. Welcome to the show, and we're grateful that you're joining us. Ryan Jesperson here, Samuel G. Brooks along with me.
Good morning.
In just a second, how the heck are you doing, by the way?
I'm good.
I should never just blow past the how are you doing this morning.
Oh, that's fine.
We know that people are tuning in from Brunei and United Arab Emirates, and Costa Rica and Belize, and I don't know what the weather's like in Italy this time of year. I'm starting to name some of the countries that we see that check in with us every single day. These folks are waking up, and it's a beautiful morning here in our neck of the woods, in our part of the planet. Right now, we're barely making it through the day. We should clarify to people that we're not even talking reasonably cold temperatures. I know that it's sort of par for the course that around this time of year we just start bitching about the temperature, but my readout on my dashboard on the way into work this morning gave me minus 35 on the nose.
Oof.
Minus 35.
Ooh.
This is serious business.
Yeah, and I mean, like, first of all, to anybody who's outside and is anybody in a vulnerable position right now, like, there's help available for you for sure. It's a terrible time to be outside, but it's my God, this is, I mean, it's our annual deep freeze. We always sort of plunge into this. My face hurt just taking my garbage out this morning.
See, here's the difference between you and me. I didn't take my garbage out this morning. I'm not worried about it because the garbage is waiting in the garage and it's frozen solid. So it's not going to smell at all. This is how my mind works. And when it gets to the point where I'm willing to, because when I open the big garage door, all of the heat that I've been working on building up in there, with things like space heaters and effective insulation, this is all moving towards something. I'm teeing up our 9 o'clock here.
Are you now?
Yeah, but it can be gone in an instant.
Yes.
So back in the day when we used to be able to hang out, you remember this, when we used to be able to socialize with friends and have people over.
Oh, yeah.
It was like
to be able to do that.
It was like a year ago, but you probably remember. I would get we call it the cab in my garage. We'd get it all heated up as much as possible, and then I'd invite the fellas over, and I'd always send them a text and say, "Come through the yard, come through the man door, like come through the smaller."
Right.
There'd always be the one guy. It's not the same guy every time, but there'd always be the one guy that would bang on the big garage door, and you'd be like, "Man." Then you'd have to open it, and it would just whoosh all of the warm air.
When it's cold enough, you see it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can see
It's
that
devastating.
rush of steam just fly out there.
It's totally devastating.
Oh, yeah.
And I would carry a grudge all night, and I would never really forgive that guy for causing. No, that's not really the truth. But here's the deal. Today, I'm really excited because Audric Moses is going to join us in about a half an hour, and this guy, his family unit has put a house together. They've built a house that he claims, and we have no reason to believe it's not true. He's going to tour us through his house today. They don't even have a gas line running to the house. He's not unappreciative, if I can tell by his social media activity, he's not unappreciative of nor cracking on traditional oil and gas. That's not his mandate. However, he is saying, for all the people saying, thank goodness we have oil and gas right now to keep our homes heated and keep our lights on, which is true. He's saying, I just wanted to show you there is an alternative. So he's going to tour us through his NetZero home. He says now I wonder if that's hyperbole or if he actually literally doesn't have a gas line running to his house. We're going to find out.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because, first of all, I thought gas was just run to properties by default.
Yeah.
But second of all, that's risky. And I only say that because, I know people that have alternative forms of energy coming into their house, and they still have a gas line as a backup. They still just want the comfort of knowing it's there in case they need to flick a furnace on because something went down or something's not right and that kind of thing, too. So it's just you're really trusting yourself if you don't have a gas line.
Yeah, no kidding. Is Mayor with us yet? I don't want to keep him waiting.
Not quite.
Okay, no problem. So it allows me to say hi. I mean, I never want to take this for granted. We don't do this every single show, but we should. Nancy and Michelle and Audra and Keith and Patrick and Nicole and Sean and Crazy James and Troy and Kaylin and Scott and Penny and Lauren and Lisa and everybody saying, and I just stopped. I could keep going. Everybody saying good morning this morning. I love it. Shalane says it's cold, but I'm looking forward to heated debate. We'll see if we can kick some up here. You got it. Keith says it's a pumping morning in the raisin-free kitchen. Keith is trying to get under my skin early. It's not going to work, Keith. I'm having a great morning. It's not going to work. He says Jespa will bring the thunder, keep the cook moving, and everybody will get a free tablespoon of soup. I love it. Keith is like our town crier. That's perfect. And a few folks are noticing the glasses. This is I've actually been participating.
You got new specs.
Well, here's the thing: is they're not, but I've been participating in an exercise. So you've seen me through 53 shows rocking these glasses, right? They're made out of wood, or at least they look like they're supposed to. Well, I've been doing some purging and cleaning, and I was going through my closet, and I found these ones, which I've always really loved. This is annoying for people on the podcast. You're going to have to watch us on YouTube if you want to see. So I rocked these out, but I've also brought, I've also brought these ones, Real Talkers. You can let me know what you think. I've come across like 5 or 6 pairs, and I think I'm going to start rocking them again and getting to know them again. Each pair is a little bit different. Some of the prescriptions might even be a little bit dated. I went through and I got, I got inspired to start rocking different glasses again. So we'll see if it changes the interviews maybe. I don't know.
I have a friend, I kid you not, she has 12 pairs of glasses.
Yeah, some
anytime
people,
she gets a new prescription, she's just like, yeah, I want it in every color.
Yes. And she probably works a second job to make it happen.
Yeah, probably.
So we'll see. I wonder if I will see things differently. I wonder if I will approach life differently with new glasses. I'm not sure. We'll find out in our first interview with he chairs. I'm going to have to ask Mayor Don Iveson what his official title is again. He chairs the Big City Mayors Caucus, I think it is. We'll say he steers it. Here's a hot tip. If you're about to get into an interview and you can't exactly remember some of the specific details, you find ways to substitute in words that just make it look like you're approaching the interview casually. So, for example, right now I could fact check and see, is it chair of the Big City Mayors Caucus that Mayor Don Iveson is? What I'll do is I'll come in and I'll say something casual to indicate that he and I have a friendly relationship. So I'll say something like, hey, Mayor, you're the big cheese, aren't you? You steer the ship there over the big, what is it there? The big boss, man. What do they call you? And then he'll tell us, and then I'll write that down quickly so I don't screw it up twice. That interview's coming up in 30 seconds, right after I remind you that the team at Bitcoin Well is the proud presenting sponsor of Real Talk each and every morning. Are you keeping an eye on Bitcoin? Oh boy. All it took was Tesla's CEO, Elon Musk, Tesla's founder, Elon Musk, to essentially buy $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin, and the price has just surged. When I last looked at it last night, these are not official numbers. Don't report these to your accountant. These are just what I'm noticing on my apps. Bitcoin was up 19% yesterday. It's booming. Now, you may have questions about it. It may not be a great fit for you. It might be the best move you ever make. Either way, you're going to want to talk to the team at Bitcoin Well to get it sorted under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
So here's the deal. In roughly 20 minutes or so, we're going to tour a NetZero home. In roughly 45 to 50 minutes from now, we'll talk to the conservation director of Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. We'll get a sense of what actually happens as the Alberta government announces yesterday it's going to roll back rescinding the coal policy. Some people are saying, don't take your foot off the gas. It's a trick. It's a trap. We're going to find out from Katie Morrison. And then around 10 o'clock, I'm looking forward to checking in with Talia Lavin. She's got a remarkable book, Culture Warlords, where she's essentially gone undercover online. She's infiltrated white supremacist message boards, etc. She's a Jewish author out of Brooklyn. She's got a remarkable story. I cannot wait to hear about her new book. Talia Lavin coming up right around 10 o'clock today. But let's get to it. Of course, he's the mayor of Edmonton. He announced exclusively on this show, our very first broadcast, that he would not seek a re-election, which has everybody wondering, what's he going to do next? And, of course, he is the big cheese steering the ship with the Big City Mayors Caucus. Of course, welcoming back to the show His Worship, Edmonton Mayor Don Iveson. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Hey, no problem, Ryan. Thanks for having me back. And I serve at the pleasure of 21 other mayors of Canada's largest cities. And that makes me the chair of the Big City Mayors Caucus, which is a group of mayors embedded within the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. But the thing that's relevant politically is that together we represent more than half of the country's population and more than 2/3 of its economy. And so it's a group that has a lot of influence in Ottawa. And through the pandemic, it's been a really great community of support as well, because leadership in all sectors of our communities has been challenged. And so having that peer support network and folks you can compare notes with has been tremendously valuable. We've actually met more in the last year than in the 5 years before. So it's been a great group to work with. It's been one of the highlights of my time as mayor to serve as chair of that group and a national voice for cities. And as we go into the next federal budget cycle, there's no less urgency for cities on all of the pre-existing priorities around transit, infrastructure, job creation, and housing and homelessness issues, but there's also pandemic recovery issues. And so this week we're talking to leaders of a number of the federal parties, as well as key cabinet ministers within the government, to make our position plain to all folks who will have an opinion on the budget and potentially have something to put forward to Canadians in the way of a pitch in an election sometime this year. So very busy advocacy season for us, and a little bit of work off the side of my desk, but it's all for Edmonton's benefit as well, because whatever the cities get, Edmonton generally does well with.
How have these conversations changed? You say that you're meeting now, the Big City Mayors Caucus and plus the meetings with Ottawa, I presume, more frequently than you did 5 years ago. Is that because maybe some of the funding relationships have changed? Is it because the relationships with cities and this government is different than the previous federal government? Why do you think it is?
Well, COVID's changed a number of things logistically. So we used to meet more or less exclusively in person twice a year. Maybe we'd have a third meeting or a summit of some kind around a particular issue and the odd conference call. But now, because we're all doing this kind of thing virtually, it's actually been really easy to get together with our colleagues and also to have sort of pickup meetings with, I don't know, we must have met with Chrystia Freeland more than a dozen times early in the pandemic. And then with many of her colleagues working on the Rapid Housing Initiative, working on a number of the COVID recovery measures, the Safe Restart agreements with essential dollars to support municipalities, and our budget crunches, particularly in the big cities around public transit. And by the way, that's not going away for 2021. You know, our transit system is at least 2/3 empty right now, but we got to keep running it for essential services workers. And so, you know, we're now into the next cycle of pushing for that operating support for essential services that Canadians still depend on in all municipalities, but especially our big cities, which are sort of outsized exposed to COVID. You know, for us in 2021, it's a $63 million shortfall on transit. You can imagine the staggering numbers for Montreal and Toronto, which are in the hundreds of millions of dollars for shortfalls just on transit operating. So we're still having those conversations. So there's urgency around all of those issues, but there's also a tremendous possibility to do things that on an accelerated timeline that didn't seem possible before. So the federal government's movement on the Rapid Housing Initiative in the fall, and their commitment now to go from sort of a milquetoast goal of reducing homelessness by half to now a stated commitment that many cities share to end chronic homelessness in this country. There's an opportunity to create a ton of jobs and then also save provinces a ton of money on healthcare and justice. Just as the provinces are going broke and saying, Ottawa, we need more money, there's a chance to actually reduce costs in some of the most expensive areas of service provision through housing as a mitigation strategy for people who are a tremendous burden on the healthcare and justice system today, because their homelessness drives bad health outcomes and is essentially criminalized. And so, you know, now the art of the possible has shifted in terms of, you know, the end of homelessness being within sight, the federal government stepping up to fund it. We want them to top up beyond the billion. Ultimately, there's about another $7 billion worth of opportunity to purchase hotels and other units, rapidly build modular housing, and get this done in a way that, again, will overall save taxpayers money in the short to medium term through those reduced health and justice costs.
Mayor, when you say that the end of homelessness is in sight, for the average person, actually right now might be a bad example in the city of Edmonton. People are listening from all over, but I'll say in Edmonton right now, there's no doubt people are experiencing homelessness right now. Hopefully somewhere, I mean, this is a matter of life and death in weather like this, but back at the end of August, you talked about a 10-week plan to end homelessness. It was obviously ambitious. I think it's safe to say homelessness has not ended now, but for the average person walking down the street, they might see evidence of homelessness all around them. What do you think it would take to actually end homelessness, so to speak? And we talk about federal expenditures, we talk about budgeting at every level, but realistically, people are going to say, and I don't want to call them cynics, maybe even realists would say, people have been homeless since the human race began.
So within that 10-week period, three things happened. One, we opened the convention center, which is not permanent housing for people, which will work better to stabilize folks and as an environment to support their addictions and mental health recoveries. But everybody had a place to come in from the cold within those 10 weeks. As far as permanent housing, there's still more work to do there. But the second thing that happened was the federal government pulsed $1 billion into rapid acquisition of units. And we have units under construction and hotels under option for the next phase of funding if additional rapid housing initiative money comes through. We need between 600 and 900 units of housing with embedded mental health and addiction supports and cultural supports for people so that they will stay housed. All the evidence shows that folks who are in that category of won't stay housed or choose to be homeless just haven't been given the right supports and the right safety to come in out of the cold, and that it can be done. It requires a lot of care and attention at the beginning, but that good outcomes are achieved and that then reduced cost, reduced impact follows. So housing first is the model. People still send me information about Medicine Hat, which achieved this goal here in Alberta. So the needs are more acute in the large cities, but with the provision of the right kind of housing, with the right kind of supports, all the evidence says that it should be possible and that it should save us a ton of money. So the third thing that happened during that time was, again, as I mentioned, the federal government raised its level of ambition from a 50% reduction, which we've shown is already easily achievable with the right resources, to this goal of ending chronic homelessness in the country. Now, it may be one of those Sisyphean things where just as you house the last person who was homeless, someone else becomes homeless. So it's not that you'll eliminate people falling into homelessness, but the chronic aspect of it is eliminatable, and it may take multiple tries with some high needs individuals, which is why you need different housing with different service providers and even some competition between different programs in order to find the right fit for people culturally and medically. But it is achievable if you're prepared to not give up on people. I actually think the cynical option of saying, well, maybe we should just give up on those people, I think is unacceptable. I think it's just morally unacceptable. And it creates the social disorder issues, and it allows individuals to interact, particularly with the healthcare system in some extreme cases, at the cost of well over $1 million a year to the taxpayer. So I think it's worth, building and delivering a suitable unit and providing the 24/7 embedded supports to help that person have a more dignified life that is much more cost effective for the public and reduces the social disorder issues that we're seeing out there in our community that are a barrier to investment. So I think it's business friendly. I think it's bottom line friendly. And most importantly, I think it's a dignified thing to do in a country that has the resources to do it and has now made the commitment. So I think we've raised the level of ambition with that call, both for ourselves and for the country. And we'll continue to work to deliver that goal.
I'm scanning our live chat now, and people are talking about different things. Some people want me to ask you about reopening our economy and bouncing back from COVID. I'll do that before our time is up. There's a lot of commentary on transit right now. I know that that's been a huge priority of yours. When mayors or when political leaders at different levels evaluate or even plot out, maybe they would never probably call them publicly their legacies, but they might talk about their priorities. One of yours has obviously been transit infrastructure in Edmonton. We've got some viewers right now down in Calgary saying, the provincial government is holding our transit development hostage. Our transportation minister is, one says, is my MLA, says a viewer from down in Calgary. Obviously in Edmonton right now, there's some transit projects underway, some others planned. There's not complete buy-in from the provincial government. Is there? I mean, it's essential funding through the province. Is there a way that the federal government works directly with municipalities to ensure that transit and transit expansion or infrastructure remains a priority and remains doable, despite the hesitance of some provincial governments, not just in Alberta?
Well, we've shown that there is a pathway, and we're going to have the job creation results to show for it. I mean, we secured the funding early in my time as mayor for the Southeast line from the Harper government and the Redford government. And then that line will open later this year. Phase 2 of that line out to the West End, thanks to the new federal transit funding, is going to create 12,500 jobs. And that 27-kilometer line is going to change the lives of hundreds of thousands of Edmontonians over time and spur massive redevelopment along that line in ways that support, the mini downtowns of those 15-minute neighborhoods we talk about in our city plans. So it's not all about LRT. This is also why we're redesigning the bus network to feed into that long-term mass transit network, and all to align and support the city plan's goal of situating the next 1 million people within the footprint of the city, within the boundaries of the city that we have right now, in a more fiscally sustainable way. So, density means a more cost-effective city. It's also a lower environmental footprint city and a more affordable city for people if they're less car dependent. So, multiple bottom line impact is really what we've been after here. And to the guts of your question about commitment from senior orders of government, we have worked hard to secure that commitment from multiple governments of multiple stripes over the years, and we were able to get the funding agreement from this provincial government for the provincial share of the West Line. And there's actually still some money promised to Edmonton that's notionally allocated to the South LRT line that we've put forward as a stimulus initiative, because we've been doing the design work to actually get that shovel ready for 2022. There's federal dollars from the existing transit program allocated to that. And again, notionally, a few $100 million worth of provincial money that was promised to Edmonton that I'm trying to make sure gets mobilized, because that's another 4,500 jobs during construction and a way to beat congestion for people in South Edmonton. It actually takes it close to the new hospital site that's being built down there as a major employment node. So it's the backbone of the city plan and our vision for the kind of city that the council also sees and the public sees through the city plan. One of the things we're talking to leaders from parties with the Big City Mayors this week is about the creation of a permanent transit infrastructure fund, so that we have longitudinal funding, because the funding that's announced right now actually runs out in, I think, 2027, 2028. And some of these mega projects, particularly in the bigger cities, run way out beyond that. They're 10 and 20-year projects. And so you need a permanent commitment from the feds to get a permanent commitment, or at least a long-term commitment out of your provinces to build this backbone infrastructure. This would be the money that allows us to go south, closer to the airport, northwest into Castle Downs and up towards St. Albert, to continue to extend in all directions, northeast and southeast over time, and also to be able to fill in the gaps with bus rapid transit infrastructure across town between all these things. And you need that if you're going to go from 1 million to 2 million people and not get crushed with the traffic. That's been the problem of, a city like Austin, which has been a wonderful model of urban growth and innovation and sort of standing apart from its state and being the hit place to be. I mean, Edmonton's very well positioned to do that, but they didn't invest in any transit infrastructure. Now that one of their biggest problems is the traffic congestion they have there. So So we want to get out ahead of that with support and alignment from all orders of government. I'm not going to go into some of the challenges in Calgary, but I do think that if there was a long-term commitment from senior orders of government for the dollars, then this issue of is it one phase or two phases for the Green Line goes away, because you can just chip away and continue to build it. And you're going to get better value for money too if you can bundle up to the full project. Our Valley Line would have been a lot more straightforward to procure, particularly the P3 issues around it, if it had been an open-ended commitment rather to build the whole thing in one shot rather than in phases, which drives a ton of extra cost and complexity.
Mayor, I want to get to a few questions here. I'm wondering if we can do kind of quick hits here on the chat line, because there's a bunch of people with a bunch of questions.
I suck at quick answers.
No, I know.
Try.
We've spoken enough times that I pick my questions carefully. Like my next question was going to be, are you satisfied with your legacy? Which is a huge question, but I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it for the summer into the fall, because I want to get to. Let
me think about that for a few months.
Well, and I want to give you some time. You've still got some runway. You don't want us. You don't start talking about the end of someone's political career when they've still got 9 months left. So why don't we talk about what's going on in the meantime quickly?
I'm not dead yet.
I'm not dead yet. I should know the answer to this, but I don't. Listeners wondering if Edmonton is testing wastewater for COVID like some other municipalities are. We've heard of this before. Is Edmonton doing that as far as you know?
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah,
and I'll commit to follow up on that. I hadn't heard that we are, but I'll find out.
Okay. Another listener, Terry, wants me to ask you about some of the changes. I think it was Bill 21 under the United Conservatives that changed election funding. And a lot of people are concerned that there's going to be a lot of big money and the influence of PACs, political action committees, in this next municipal election. Are you concerned about it?
The short answer is yes. And I actually think if there are going to be a bunch of questions on the ballot, one of the ones that I'd like to hear from Edmontonians is whether they would like cities to be able to set their own stricter rules than these very lax and problematic rules that have been set forth by the government. Municipalities were consulted on this and provided, and the public also provided strong feedback, which the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association FOIP'd, and the feedback from the public was overwhelmingly not to loosen the rules in the way that they were, but the government did that anyway. I think it's appalling, and I think it sullies the process. So yeah, I have very strong feelings about that. Our council has very strong feelings about that. And I think people should be very leery of and be demanding to know where the money is coming from in all of these campaigns before Election Day, rather than in lax subsequent disclosures that are too late to know, who's financing either PACs or candidates.
Arnold says, wow, I've been critical of Iveson in the past, but I'm impressed by his discussion of homelessness. Mark says, would the mayor prefer a COVID-0 strategy with a state of emergency? Could he not lead us down a different path, save lives and our economy, short-term pain, long-term gain? A lot of pubs, restaurants, some facilities, personal fitness trainers, a lot of people were able to kind of start going back to work a little bit yesterday in the province of Alberta. Ontario's doing similar things there. How do you feel about all of this? It's such a complicated situation, and I personally don't believe that there's one right answer, but people look to people like you for definitive decisions. How are you feeling right now?
Concerned about reopening, given the variants that are in circulation right now. I think if the variant, so we're seeing overall case counts down because the restrictions have worked, but we're seeing the variants rise. And if those get loose in higher transmission environments like bars and restaurants, then we're going to have a huge problem on our hands, because the stress hasn't all come off the healthcare system. Folks who came in the second wave, there's still a lot of folks in the system, even though capacity is eased. So we have a lot less buffer than we did before. So I would be taking a very cautious approach about reopening. As for COVID-0, I think it makes sense on islands. I think it's a little bit harder to do unless you're prepared to enforce border restrictions. It's really impossible for a city to do it on its own. It's really got to be coordinated at the regional and provincial level with very strict border measures. And so I think it might have made sense to pursue that strategy at an earlier point in the pandemic. And if the powers that be came together and said it was the right strategy to pursue, pursue now. I think it would make sense. I think if you're depending on getting back to normal via vaccination, though, rather than sort of a contagion whack-a-mole, then we just got to ride it out until the vaccine's more widely available later this year. So really tough trade-offs. There is no perfect answer on this, and it's a little bit harder to do when you've got some porosity to borders, which we do here in a place like this. So no perfect answer on these things. I know people are have very, very high standards for decision making, but I have a lot of empathy for the trade-offs that both provincial and federal decision makers are grappling with.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Let me ask you this in closing. I want to respect your time. I know you have to go, so do we. This is a bit out of left field, but it's an interesting one, and I've never asked you about this before. Mark says his worship has supported cleanup of oil and gas wells, orphan wells, as a job creator. Will he do so again on Real Talk? I don't think I've ever heard you on the record about orphan wells. Is that something that's been on your desk?
Oh, 100% through the Western Economic Solutions Task Force of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Cleanup of oil wells has been a hot topic of conversation. I've done quite a bit of work with the federal government directly advocating for this on behalf of particularly our rural municipalities who have these liabilities affecting landowners. But it's a huge job creation program. I do think that the industry should also bear some responsibility for those liabilities and cleanup costs. It shouldn't all fall to, national taxpayers to do this. But I do think that both as economic recovery to what's happened with oil and gas, and then also with COVID, I think it makes a ton of sense for the federal government to participate alongside the regulators, industry, and the provincial government, local governments, and landowners to do this. I think there's definitely a national role. I just don't think, quite frankly, the Alberta regulatory regime was tight enough either, and that we can't just export that lax approach to these regulatory issues to the federal government without serious commitments about holding producers to account henceforth on this. So it's a complex issue, but I've actually done quite a bit of work on it with my colleagues from the prairies here, and I appreciate that both the federal and provincial governments have stepped up on this. The feds put $1 billion in and haven't really gotten credit for doing that, but municipalities haven't got the credit for convincing the feds to do that. Not that we single-handedly did that, but these are the things off the side of my desk that you don't always hear about. So I appreciate the question.
Yeah, well, and we appreciate your availability. I know we'll talk again. I know you've got a meeting that started 2 minutes ago, so your staff will never let us meet if I don't cut you loose. Thanks for this, Mayor. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan.
You bet. That's the chair of the Big City Mayors Caucus. As mentioned, it's the 22 most populated cities in Canada. So, all the big ones. Mayor Iveson's been chair there for, I think, at least 2 terms. And, of course, the mayor of Edmonton. We're going to be touring a NetZero home right now that's holding steady at 20 degrees Celsius. So says Audric Moses, the homeowner. It's holding steady at 20 degrees Celsius inside. While it's negative, it's like minus 35 right now in Edmonton, approximately. It was minus 35 on Sam and my way into work this morning, dipped down about minus 40 overnight. So we're talking extreme temperatures. Homeowner says that he's doing it all without natural gas. And so we're going to find out how he built it. We're going to get an inside look. A lot of people, what I love here is if you've ever done door-to-door sales, or if you ever studied Og Mandino, the greatest salesman in the world, or if you've ever sold anything at any level, you know that your number one assignment, or at least one of your top assignments, is to answer objections. And it seems to me like this could be an exercise in answering objections. Yeah, but there's not enough sun for solar to work in Edmonton. Yeah, but what about when it snows? Yeah, but what about when everything freezes? Yeah, but what about the insulation or the R value? Yeah, but what about cost of making all this happen? We're going to ask all these questions to our homeowner coming up in just a moment. Right now, it's probably a perfect time to remind you of our partnership with Kubi Energy. Kubi, and many of you are reaching out. Please keep the emails coming to talk@ryanjesperson.com, letting us know that you've booked your appointments with Kubi. You're starting your solar journey, and the journey starts sometimes with just figuring out what's a good fit for you. What can they do for you? Where would they be installed? What would it cost? What could you get back? with regards to rebates or government-funded incentives. Kubi does all the paperwork for you. They're proudly headquartered out of Edmonton, Alberta. They also have an office in Kamloops, BC, which means they can cover essentially Western Canada, especially for those big commercial projects. But they're proud to do residential too with their certified journeyman electrical installers. They're certified by Tesla. You can find them online at kubienergy.ca. You can just follow the link under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. That's also where you will find the team at Friesen Brothers coming up March 5th. They open up their 15th Alberta location. Friesen Brothers has been proudly supporting Alberta producers for the more than 60 years that the family has owned and operated the business, whether it's Alberta beef, pork, turkey, chicken, Alberta milled flour in their sourdough, or even Alberta produce whenever they can. Friesen Brothers is proud to be Alberta owned and Alberta grown. Let's take a look at the news. There's a story that's a lot of people are buzzing about right now. You'll want to check it out if you're a subscriber at theglobeandmail.com. Evidence shows that female partners at a Toronto law firm earned 25% less than their male colleagues last year. It's a remarkable story. It's just broken. I've only just seen the headline, haven't had a chance to read it. Gives me some, my brain starts working right now for the next roundtable that we'll host here on Real Talk. As mentioned with Mayor Iveson on Monday, across Alberta, school-related and limited indoor and outdoor children's sport and performance activities, personal fitness with your one-on-one trainer, dine-in service at restaurants, cafes, and pubs allowed again province-wide in Alberta. Ontario's making a similar move. Now, here are some of the rules you need to know about. Dine-in service is allowed for up to 6 people per table as long as you're all from the same household. People that live alone can eat with up to 2 close contacts. Now, restaurants do not have to adhere to capacity restrictions, but they do have to make sure tables are 2 meters apart. There are some limitations on when they need to close as well. In-person dining by 11 p.m. Liquor service ends at 10 p.m. Of course, a lot of business owners find themselves in a tough spot right now. Do they bring their staff back? Do they open up again? Desperate to generate some revenue, but very aware of these new variants of COVID-19. We're always curious to know how you're feeling about this. Please take us up on our offer to send us an email. You are the ones that allow us to know how the public's feeling on any given subject. And of course, we're looking down the line as well as for future questions of the week presented by Y Station. And finally, here's a good news story reported by Sean Silkoff, who's the tech reporter for Globe and Mail. Simon, which is a Calgary startup, it's become one of Canada's most rapidly expanding tech enterprises, has raised an additional, they've just announced, $43 million U.S. in venture capital. This is 9 months after securing more than $50 million U.S. from investors. The financing led by Innovia Capital, and basically everybody's saying that this is a bright counterpoint, to say the very least, to Alberta's bleak economic front right now in the oil and gas industry. It's amazing to see Alberta entrepreneurs and Western Canadian entrepreneurs continue to succeed, and we'll keep you posted on more stories like this. Wanted to also let you know that coming up on the show a little bit later, we're going to bring you some audio from an Alberta church. We're going to bring you some audio from the podium. We're going to bring you an excerpt from their Sunday service. This is the church that saw its pastor arrested and charged yesterday after they've been repeatedly breaking public health orders around COVID-19. We're going to get to some of your responses on that. If you want to tee something up ahead of time, you know where to find us. The hashtag RealTalkRJ is where you can get us. And of course, you can also swing by the Chatterbox, our live chat, by subscribing to our YouTube channel. This next story, I caught this guy's tweet just a while back and was blown away at what our next guest has built. Audric Moses is a manager of the lipidomics core facility at the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry at the University of Alberta. He's an environmental health advocate. He's a part-time bike commuter, and he is a net zero homeowner. Audric, welcome to Real Talk, and thanks for making time for us.
Thanks, Ryan. Great to be here.
Well,
how's my audio?
Your audio sounds perfectly fine. Thanks very much. And we're excited that you've agreed to essentially tour us around your place right now. But before you take us around, you've provided our team with some photos of the build of your beautiful new home, this NetZero home. You've been proudly showing us your thermostat. It's holding steady at a comfortable 20 degrees inside with 40 and minus 40 temperatures outside. And you say not even a natural gas line running to the house. Do you mean literally? Is there literally no natural gas line running to the house?
I believe the line stops on the street somewhere, and so yeah, it does not make its way to the house.
Wow, so that takes some confidence at the building stage. Take us into the concept behind this and the carryout.
Yeah, so my wife Marni and I, who I would say she knows as much or more about this stuff than I do. She's got an MBA specializing in sustainability. So we always wanted to do this. And so I had toured some of the NetZero homes as part of the Eco Solar home tour. So if you go to ecosolar.ca, every year they have a tour of efficient homes, essentially around Edmonton and now Calgary. And so basically we figured we could do this, and I'm just going to take my earpiece out because it's bothering me. And so yeah, we were ready to move into a new place, and thought, why don't we try to make it super efficient? And it worked out well in the end.
Okay, so was part of your motivation? Were you saying let's do this to save money? Were you saying let's do this to be environmentally friendly? Did part of you want to prove the doubters wrong?
I would say it's part of A and B there. So in the long run, we thought it would be a good financial investment, but certainly we wanted to clean up our carbon footprint to some degree. And there are many different ways to do that. And this is just one of them.
So where do you need to begin when it comes to this? Because it's so much more than just putting solar panels on the roof, right? Or so much more than investing in the latest technology when it comes to the glass you have in your windows. Where do you begin at literally at a foundational level?
Yeah, so I would say if you're doing a new build, you either need to start doing a lot of research on your own, and there are definitely resources out there. Or alternatively, you can go to one of the builders in your location that does this sort of thing all the time. So I'm not trying to paint myself as like a real home green building expert. That's not necessarily the case. The actual experts are the guys who do this for a living, like the guys and girls who do this all the time. And actually, I made a little list for people in case they are interested of some of the more prominent green builders in Edmonton. So Habitat Studio is one. There's a fellow named Peter Amarongan who's a real, essentially, some people call him the godfather of NetZero homes in Edmonton here.
Isn't Peter kind of? I think I've heard that name before, Audric. He's kind of famous for his own home, isn't he?
I'm actually not 100% sure about his own home.
If I'm thinking of the same guy, yeah, I think we might be right.
It's certainly possible, yeah.
So when you're taking a look at these builders and when you're saying I want to build NetZero, to cut to the chase, do you have to be able to roll in with a budget that's between 10 and 30 or 40% higher than it would cost you to build your standard home without all the bells and whistles?
Yeah, it's definitely not as high as 30 or 40%. I think generally a lot of people would estimate that it's 10%, and those are even estimates from a number of years ago. And costs, of course, are dropping quite rapidly for that sort of thing. So there are some builders even around here that have gotten really good at doing this for as low a cost as possible. And sort of on that cost-effective end, I would definitely say Landmark Homes is sort of a leader. Like they've, I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, and they were showcasing essentially a single-family home for $400,000 on a nice lot that's fully NetZero. So that's the sort of budget where you might be looking at if you're looking at a new build for a single family home anyways.
So, Audric, you start literally, and maybe Sam can tee up some of these photos for us. You've sent us basically images through the entire build. It's got to start with foundation. It's got to start with the types of studs they're using, right? The thickness of your wall, the type of insulation. Can you take us generally through the process? I know that viewers right now, including Julie Cusick, that they're planning on upgrading their pad. She says she's watching intently. People are taking notes right now. So what are some of the hacks, if you will?
So essentially the building envelope is really crucial, right? So your walls, your insulation, and the air tightness of the house itself, because essentially you don't want to be pouring money into heating the home and then having it all leak out, because essentially your house is quite porous, and normal building codes from a few years ago essentially didn't make builders build to any sort of airtight standard. And so it's better than that now, but you really want to go all out when you're making your building envelope airtight. And so that certainly is step one. Like, you have to have a well-insulated airtight home if you are even considering electrifying and getting off the natural gas line.
So, Audric, do we need to have a different conversation? So Julie, for example, says they're piloting panelized technology for a deep energy retrofit on their house this coming summer through the Retrofit Canada project. She says we can't wait to be net zero. What do they need when you're retrofitting a home? Is it it's obviously got to be a whole different ball game. It's a different project.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I won't lie, it's a lot harder to do a retrofit, just because the structure of old homes tends to really not even be anywhere near as solid as it needs to be for net zero. So that's an area I think that's improving really quickly. And I think what a lot of retrofitters are doing is that they're essentially re-insulating and redoing the exteriors of houses. So instead of tearing down walls indoors, they do everything from the outside, basically. And so they add insulation and new siding and whatnot, all from the outside. And so that does simplify things for sure.
People can check out your Twitter thread at Audric Moses. You posted it February 7th, and you go through. I wanted to cover some of the things that you're not going to be able to show us now, obviously, like like your double wall studs that Sam was able to show us the photos of, your airtight building envelope. So when it comes to some of the other stuff, you've got this an air source heat pump. Your HVAC's a little bit different. Heat recovery ventilator, an air source heat pump, hot water tank. Triple paned windows, all this kind of stuff. For those of us that are at a very entry level of understanding the significance of this equipment or this infrastructure or how it works, can we ask you to brag a little bit?
Yeah, well, there's not much bragging involved. Anyone can grab one of these at any time, especially the hot water tanks. Although, to be fair, in Alberta, natural gas is quite cheap, so I'm not actually sure if you would save any money by switching to an air source heat pump hot water tank as opposed to your gas heated hot water tank. So so essentially that copper coil that you saw in the photo, that's a drain water heat recovery coil. And so anytime someone's using a lot of hot water and it's flowing down the drain, so essentially showers is the main use for that. I believe it's up to 80% of the heat from that water is captured by the copper coil and is transferred to the cold water that's going into the hot water tank. So that supposedly saves quite a lot on your hot water bill. I think it's up to 40%. Of your hot water costs, just by having this preheated water and making use of heat that otherwise would have gone to waste.
Are you able to take us somewhere in the home and show us where the design might be a little bit different, or give us an example of the way that this home has been built to allow for the efficiency? I mean, first of all, just at a personal level, how does it make you feel to know that it's minus 35 outside and your house is holding steady at 20? Like, this is kind of right now this week the ultimate test, isn't it? I mean, limited daylight, lots of snow, frigid cold, everything that people say is supposed to bring a design like your home to its knees.
Yeah, no, it feels great just to know that what we planned out is actually working just as we hoped it would. And it's not really a matter of just showing off and saying, hey, look, we're net zero. I think the point to drive home here is just that it's possible for everyone to stop wasting energy and do things in a more efficient way, just in order to reduce that climate footprint or that carbon footprint. And there just are so many different ways to do that. And some of them even involve natural gas furnaces. So there are net zero homes, even in the area, I think, that are net zero, but they hit all the bells and whistles for insulation and airtightness and all that stuff. But they are able to hit net zero still using natural gas. So it's just a different way to go about it. And the way that we did it is certainly not the best way. It's not the only way. The situation is different for every person and every house that they're dealing with.
How well does it? We saw there a shot of your roof covered in those solar panels. How well do they do? Are you? I mean, with regards to, you said your natural gas the line stops at the street. With regards to power, I would imagine you've got some sort of a backup source. How well does the solar perform? You know, when we've got 8 hours of daylight and there's a bunch of snow up there.
Yeah. So essentially, the solar installers in our area, they'll size your system essentially for what you need, and they take into account the time that the panels may be covered by snow in winter, the daylight hours in winter, which are significantly less. So it certainly isn't necessary to make the effort to clean those panels off. We don't. It's a 2-story house. It would probably be a little dangerous. But I think that if we had a bungalow, I would probably be raking those things off just to squeeze that extra bit of clean energy out of the setup.
Yeah.
However, when they're deep covered in snow, they don't produce much. However, they do heat up fairly quickly, and so the snow tends to slide off as soon as there's any kind of warmth outdoors.
Audric, I know a lot of people are excited to tour this house a little bit. Can we ask you to show us around? Can we ask you to show us some of the cool stuff that you're able to see right now, not through the walls?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just see if I can get this working. I'm going to switch the camera.
Oh, there we go.
All right. So it's the kitchen here is fairly conventional. Efficient appliances, of course. The only thing that I would say maybe is somewhat of interest is, so we've got this induction cooktop. So induction works. Are you seeing this delay on the video, by the way? It's kind of
it's all good
for me.
No, it's working fine for us. Yep, you bet.
Yeah. So essentially, it's induction. So rather than an electric element heating up the glass cooktop, and that's what heats up your pot. Induction works by directly using magnets to heat up any pot that contains iron or sufficient amounts of iron. And so yeah, it saves quite a bit of energy, I think, over conventional cooktops. So the other thing I wanted to show you was, a lot of people ask, like, what are those things, those circles in the wall?
Yeah.
Right. So they look like little mouse holes. They might look like those those
pot
sort of
lights
air
kinda.
transport tubes that Costco used to use. So those are actually the ducts for the heat pump system. So it's what they call a mid-velocity system. And so rather than how a regular furnace kind of blasts hot air for short or long periods of time, and then the house kind of cools off, and once it drops, the furnace blasts hot air again. With this system, it maintains a much more consistent temperature using lower flows of air, and it just keeps the house more comfortable because you don't get these big temperature swings. So here we are, unfinished basement, of course. So not too pretty, nothing to see. So we've got some onions and garlic hanging from last year's garden. But I wanted to show you the insulation here. So can you see that?
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, so essentially this is the dense packed cellulose. So the double stud wall is basically two 2x4 walls beside each other, and the studs are offset. So that prevents the transfer of cold from the outside through the studs, because the studs are actually a really poor insulator. So having some cellulose between, sort of in the space in between the two walls, that really helps with the insulation.
Audric, did you explore what? Oh, attaboy, a drummer. Did you explore? Yeah. Did you explore other options? Like the people on the chat are talking about straw. I know that's been used for 20, 30 years now for some people that are building the so-called sustainable homes. There's different approaches to take. Why did you go with what you did?
Yeah, so the dense packed cellulose really was the best bang for our buck. I think with straw, don't quote me on this, but I think that straw insulation does have to be quite a bit thicker. So I'm just actually going to pass the camera to Marni here, and I'll point out the different components of this system.
Say hi to Marni for us. We appreciate her doing this.
Yeah, we do appreciate it. Thank you.
This is what everybody's been waiting to see.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we start with that drain water coil, right? So this is what where the wastewater essentially flows through, and then once it's gone through there, it goes into the tank, and there you go. You have preheated water, and so this big thing up at the top, if you can see that, so that's actually the heat pump. So it's just sitting on top of the hot water tank, and it's extracting heat from the air in the basement, and it requires a surprisingly small space. Like if we were to make this a mechanical room in the near future, we don't need to give it like 100 square yards to operate. Like we can enclose it pretty decently, not super tight, but this can be a small room and it's still effective. So those things really work well.
Audric, we've got Scott's watching right now. He goes, so does this mean that the Moses family doesn't even get utility bills? Do you not receive utility? You must receive some form of utility bill.
Yeah, so NetZero doesn't mean NetZero dollars necessarily. It just means that over the course of the year, we average, or theoretically, we should be producing as much as we use. So the way that works in practice is that in winter, we do have bills for sure. So the highest bills for this house, which is, I guess it's not a small house. So our highest bills would tend to be about $400 a month, and that's for everything. So there's no gas bill on top of that. It's just 400 and whatever.
We've got an interesting.
So we would get those.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We do have some other questions here. Let me throw a couple in front of you. Julie, she and her family are embarking on this journey themselves. She wonders, do you have a HEPA filter on your air intake? She says, I'm wondering if we can do that so we don't get air pollution from forest fires, et cetera, with the air exchanger. Scott wonders if not using forced air helps with keeping humidity at a constant level.
Right. So I don't know if so that's what this thing is up here. So this is the heat recovery ventilator. And so when you have an airtight house, you have to have this active ventilation, and it does act as a filter. I don't know if it's HEPA level filtration, but we do have a furnace filter of sorts as well that essentially is a second layer of that. So yeah. So back to actually what I was saying. So the highest bills are, say, in the $400. In summertime, we expect credits on our bills of up to, in a good year, we should be getting close to $300 credits in the height of summer.
Wow.
So it does really offset the cost, even though the cost is not net zero. And that's fair, because we shouldn't be allowed to use the grid without essentially paying for it, right? So a lot of those transmission and distribution charges we're still paying for, and that's absolutely fair. We should be paying for that.
Would your wife absolutely kill us if we asked her to appear on camera to answer a question? She didn't sign up for this. We didn't ask ahead of time.
Yeah.
How does she feel about it?
I can ask her.
Because she's got it.
Would you like to, Marni, would you like to answer a question on camera?
Sure.
I mean,
She says okay if
Marni, thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this. Can you hear me okay?
I don't think she can hear you at all.
Okay. Well, maybe Audric. So
in.
Audric, you can pass the question along. So she's an MBA in sustainability. There's going to be thousands of people that are going to watch this, and people are really inspired. Why was this important for her? And now that she's sitting here, literally broadcasting the house, what's going through her mind as you communicate this home to other people?
Yeah. So Marni, Ryan asks, so what inspired you to do this, an MBA in sustainability? And essentially, and sorry, what was the second part?
Well,
of your question,
no,
Ryan?
that's good enough as it stands. Yeah.
That's good enough. Yeah. So why did you want to do that?
Well, went to school for a long time and got a master's degree in the sciences. But one of the things that didn't translate well was that whole idea of the business community understanding the science and using that evidence to make really good, smart business decisions. And so I wanted to get into a space where the business community would, sort of take that science and agree with it and sort of use it to make decisions. And so in order to get there, you had to have a business credential, so people would kind of believe that you understood both the science and the business side. So that's why I decided to do the MBA, to have credibility on both sides.
A fascinating field. Can you ask her, Audric, if she believes that your home answers the critics and the haters? I mean, in the middle of Edmonton, freezing cold, here it is comfortable. Is this the answer to the haters?
So Marni, do you think that this house and how it's performing answers the critics and the haters of clean energy?
I hope so. Lots of people, wonder about these things, like how can it be done? And I think this is a good example of how it can be done. So I think it definitely demonstrates that it works. I think there's lots of new technologies coming out that will make things even better and easier. But I think this is a good first step for sure.
And finally, Audric, could you ask her, is there with regards to property value, resale, does she believe in that context that a move like this is a no-brainer?
Yeah. So do you think that property value and resale value are positively affected by something like this?
Definitely. People are more aware of the cost of home ownership. And, when you look at the costs, like the expenses, associated with owning a home, it's not just, the actual mortgage and the cost of the house, but it's all of the things, the maintenance. And so as people become more aware of those things and are thinking about them and understand how that affects your monthly bills, that this will be a huge feature for people in the future. Definitely.
Very cool.
I talk to more and more people every day who have that thought anyway.
This is great. Well, Marni, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Audric, I want to ask you in closing. I've been following you on Twitter at Audric Moses, and I encourage other people to do the same. And one of the things that I thought was kind of funny, although I would imagine for you kind of frustrating, is that the minute that you post about your home, you start getting those chirps. people start coming at you and saying, "Well, how do you think that your solar panels were manufactured? We still need oil and gas." And I noted that out of the gates, you weren't cracking on oil and gas. In fact, you were very careful to say, "I'm not taking a swipe at oil and gas." How do you reconcile that conversation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This isn't meant in any way to be a dig at oil and gas. Like, our oil and gas industry is going to be around for decades more, and it should be, right? It's necessary for all sorts of things, plastics and lubricants and whatever. However, it's time that we move away for the things that it's not necessary for. So transport, heating, there are better solutions and that are certainly better for the planet. And so that's my take on that. Like, I hope that every oil industry worker in Alberta keeps their job for decades to come. What I'm opposed to is this idea that the oil sands need to continually expand and expand and expand and grow, right? I think that it's time for that to stop. And so existing industry should proceed. And I know that's not helpful for shareholders. The shareholders want the growth, right? That's how the company kind of grows itself and increases its profits. But what's helping the actual workers is simply the fact that they have work, and they can have work without having endless expansion of what is, you can't really argue that it's not really a clean industry. So yeah, that's my take on that. And actually, Ryan, before you give me the hook, I do want to make sure that the other point in my post was to point out that this PACE financing, which is now approved in Alberta and should, I think, be approved soon in Edmonton. So that's a real game changer, because that allows people to finance the cost of finance the cost of green upgrades, essentially with no money down, and to start reaping the rewards, the financial benefit of those green upgrades with zero money down, and to pay that off as part of their property tax. And the second point to that payoff is that if you sell the house, the remaining balance is transferred to the next owner. So you're not paying for the full system if you move after a year. And so it's been super effective in other jurisdictions. And I think this is one, if not the first PACE financing program like this in Canada. And it really removes the barriers to getting into these green upgrades.
We've got first of all, the technical producer of this show in the room is pumping his fist at the mention of PACE financing, and we've got viewers as well, like Patrick and Julie, that are all in all caps being like, PACE, love it. So you got people on board. Here's the thing: you may look. I mean, we have something similar, not even really remotely similar, but neighborhood upgrades that we did, and some of it, you could either pay a certain number of $1,000 an hour, roll it into your property tax. We chose the latter. What I love about PACE is that you may say, yeah, these new buyers will inherit these payments on the property tax. At the same time, they're inheriting the rebates that you've been receiving. They're inheriting the immediate return on investment, right? The work is done. And I can't imagine that wouldn't be a draw. I mean, I as a buyer myself, I'd certainly be interested.
Yeah, and if your upgrades are impactful enough in terms of your energy use, theoretically, you could end up financially ahead, even though you're paying off these upgrades, because the amount that you're saving, it is possible that would be more than the amount that you're paying in extra costs to pay it off. So really a total game changer. It basically can cost you nothing to totally green up your carbon footprint.
I guarantee you people have been taking notes nonstop on this. Our chat is so engaged right now. Audric, it's no small thing for somebody to invite a viewing audience into their home, and we're grateful that you and Marni have both done that and made yourselves available. Thanks for bringing us up to speed. This is a really neat build. Congratulations.
Thanks very much, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you got it. That's NetZero homeowners Audric and Marni, and I appreciate her coming on camera with no advance warning. I didn't know that she had an MBA in sustainability. Obviously, we got to get her on the show too, right? So I want to talk to Sam actually about pace, but we do have our next guest hanging tight. So what we'll do is we'll return to this and make sure you remind me, because I know that it's obviously struck a nerve in a good way with the viewing audience as well. Let me take this moment to remind you that the team at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge right now is ready to put you in a position to upgrade your ride, whether you're looking for maybe the 2021 Jeep lineup, the fuel-efficient Compass. They've got the 7-passenger Grand Cherokee, perfect for families. When it comes to bang for buck, nobody beats the Grand Cherokee. And then that big, beautiful Grand Wagoneer they're bringing back this year. But they've also got one of the province's best selection of Ram trucks, one of the largest inventories in Alberta. And right now they're offering 0% financing up to 96 months or discounts up to $17,500. Find the details on their website under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. Also want to remind you that the team at Eden Landscaping, their job for more than 20 years has been to help you reimagine your outdoor space. So I've been talking to you about planters and flower boxes and retaining walls, but what about forno ovens, like an outdoor pizza oven with maybe a gazebo? What about running infrastructure from the house out to your outdoor kitchen so you can entertain when we can finally make that happen again? What about taking that corner where you've always dreamed of putting a hot tub and turning it into an oasis? They can dream with you along the way, so when it starts to thaw in the spring, they can get to work. You can find them at landscapeedmonton.ca or under the sponsors tab again at ryanjesperson.com. Okay, let's get to a story that was making news late afternoon. The Alberta government appears to be walking back a decision it made to rescind the coal policy in the province, that 1976 coal policy. Now, for a lot of people, it meant celebration yesterday, that they had saved the eastern slopes, that there would be no more open pit coal mining, that the Alberta government had listened to the voice of the people, if I might say, expressed most strongly on Real Talk, and they were going to walk back the decision they made. But we cannot ignore the fact that people are warning that this may not be all it appears to be. It's why we went to Katie Morrison. She's Conservation Director for CPAWS in Southern Alberta. Katie, thanks for making time for us, and welcome back to Real Talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So we want to cut through all the politics, all the smoke and mirrors, and we want to know what's actually going on. What changed yesterday, or what went back to the way it was with the government's announcement yesterday, Energy Minister Sonia Savage making the call?
Yeah, so what they announced yesterday is that they are reinstating the coal policy in full, and not allowing any mountaintop removal until a new coal policy is created. And that sounds really good, and I think it is really good. You know, I think that is credit to, as you say, all the thousands and tens of thousands of people who, over the past several months and from last June, have been pushing back on this. But I think that it is not everything. As you mentioned, it does not stop all coal mining, and it doesn't even stop all exploration that's happening now. So good news, but with these things, there's always the but. There's definitely some big loopholes and gaps left in the whole coal issue that people are really concerned about.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of people saying, keep in mind, they're still going to be mining on the western slopes. A lot of Patrick says they're changing the water allotment regulations right now. That's something we've got to keep an eye on. You have to have, as part of your job, a pretty big picture perspective on all of this. When it comes to I don't want to say the wars that you're fighting, but when it comes to the fronts upon which you are exerting your most effort and influence, if I can leave that as a least combative wording as possible, today's political climate we know is hot. Where are you fighting your biggest fights right now in the mountains?
Well, I mean, this coal thing, I think, is the biggest fight that any of us have fought in a generation, at least, I would say. I think it has the biggest potential to change not just the Rockies and the slopes, but really Alberta in our culture and society, because those places are so much a part of our identity. And so I think this really is the biggest fight. And so yeah, we talked about reinstating the coal policy, but I've always been a little bit worried about that call for reinstating the coal policy, because the coal policy wasn't perfect either. We did need an update, but we needed it updated stronger, not removed or not weakened. So, you know, all the projects that were in previous category 4, so I think that's right now Grassy Mountain, Tent Mountain, which are in the late stages of the regulatory process, as well as Montem Chinook, which is has started exploration this past year. Those are all unaffected completely. So all of those are going forward as per usual. And then they said the 6 projects that that had started exploration already, those would be allowed to continue with exploration. They did caveat that they wouldn't be allowed to mountaintop removal or strip mine until a new coal policy is in place, but they wouldn't have been reaching that stage for probably several years anyways. But I think, you know, that the exploration phase is not benign. They are building hundreds of kilometers of roads, hundreds and hundreds of drill pads where they're, you know, doing their exploration drilling. So all of that is going to be allowed to continue on these 6 projects. They didn't release what the 6 projects are, but we had actually recently just pulled all the exploration permits from the past few years. So I think those projects are, but we will need clarity from the government on this. And I think it's something we need to be asking for clarity from the government on. Are Black Eagle in Blackstone in the Bighorn, Cabin Ridge, 2 Eland projects and a Montem project down in the Southwest. And then there was one approved in 2017. I don't know how far back they're going, but there's some exploration up around Hinton Jasper area in 2017. One of the things the minister said on that was some of these exploration permits were approved before the coal policy rescinded, which is true. But we also know that these companies had a heads up that that coal policy was going to be rescinded long before we did. So all of those projects I mentioned, except for the Alta 2 project, all of those were approved for exploration in 2019, 2020, when the government was already promising to these companies that the coal policy would be rescinded. Companies don't do that level of exploration unless they expect to be able to build a mine sometime in the future. So I'm still really concerned about the amount of activity that is going to be allowed to move forward, even despite yesterday's announcement.
Yeah, you know, Katie, there's so much to talk about here, and a lot of it, unfortunately, is only speculative because that's all one can do. But people are quite rightfully, I think, looking back to the intense opposition that the NDP experienced, the intense pushback as part of the Bighorn, the Park initiative in southern Alberta, which is exactly the region that we're talking about right now. In particular, the now Environment and Parks Minister, Jason Nixon, and people can go back. I mean, history speaks for itself. The intense amount of attention and passion that he displayed in fighting the NDP action there to classify that as parkland. And I know that people may not have the receipts, or people are starting to work on the receipts, but you have to believe, or at least there are a lot of signs that might lead one to conclude that conversations about coal mining in these sensitive environmental areas may have been going on for several years. In fact, before the United Conservative Party had even formed government.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to know who is talking to who and what was happening before. You know, I think the farthest back that I've seen any indication is in one of the investor reports, and I don't remember which one it is right now, but from 2019, so I think it was summer 2019, there was some statements around the government changing the coal policy. So at least that far back, the coal companies were having that conversation with the governments, and how much that influenced, you know, the Bighorn or any of these other pieces that we've been looking at. We can only speculate, as you say, because there is so much that we don't know.
Katie, there's an interesting angle here when it comes to Indigenous support. or community concerns around projects, I want to credit Kathleen Martins, who's done a really good job for the Indigenous news platform APTN News, and I'm citing Kathleen's reporting here, who's talked to residents and communities in southern Alberta around that Grassy Mountain area, just north of Blairmore, and there has been a prominent and unanimous Treaty 7 support for this $800 million coal mine in Crow's Nest Pass. But, you're talking to people and reporters here have talked to members of the Blood Tribe that say, we're actually really concerned right now. We're really concerned about what it's going to do. As you can see here, that it'll decapitate Grassy Mountain. Now, the economic implications may be very positive for some of these communities. These are people, these are communities, these are regions that you're talking to, that you're focusing on. How are you reconciling, or what are you noting when it comes to Indigenous support or concerns around some of these projects that quite likely will have an impact on water and the greater environmental picture?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated piece. And I think if you haven't, and I don't think you have had Latasha Caffrell.
No, I haven't.
With Niitsitapi Water Protectors on, that would be a really great follow-up, because
maybe later this week.
I think really leading from the grassroots Indigenous perspective on this. That I know one of the things that I've talked to her a lot about is that for Grassy Mountain, while the councils all signed on in support of Grassy Mountain, and it is complicated, the economic benefits that are promised, it is tough to get around that, although I have some pretty big question marks of whether those economic benefits will actually come through. But the nations and the communities are in a tough position. But one of the things that Tash talks a lot about is that while the councils signed on, there was no consultation done with the communities. So the councils did not consult the communities. And in her perspective, and I know a lot of folks that are working with her, that does not constitute consent on behalf of the Treaty 7 nations. But like I said, I think she would be perfect to get into all the details of that.
Yeah, and I don't want to come across as though I'm asking you to speak for communities. I would imagine that you're aware of some of these perspectives and have spoken to these community members. And I'm just curious to what they've been telling you.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of questions here. I think it's fair to say that there are trust issues around this government, and for good reason. Yesterday, Minister Savage is essentially saying that, the old policy will be reinstated, Alberta's coal policy, the one implemented under former Premier Lougheed, until the public can be consulted on a new one. In other words, the government has made a commitment to revamping or rewriting this coal policy. Members of the public are happy to be engaged. We've seen evidence of it by the thousands on this file in particular. Where would you suggest that members of the public need to focus their attention, and what clear message should they send to government or to their elected officials on this?
One of the things that we've been looking at is whether we need a new coal policy or whether we need a new land use plan for this region, a new vision for this region. And I think that I'm falling on that latter. I think the public consultation is going to be very important. I think we should all be engaged on that. I know it's really tough when we have lost a lot of trust in this government to say, oh, they're consulting and they're not going to listen to us anyways. But we've also seen the power that we have all been able to do working together to get this government to backtrack and change their minds on things. So I think we should be engaging, but I think we should be pushing for that not to be a coal policy, not led by the Ministry of Energy, but a plan for our Rocky Mountains that really puts in place those protections that folks are asking for. I don't think people are asking for, where in category 2 is it appropriate to mine coal? What projects are we okay with and not okay with? I think folks are looking for, at least I am looking for, a really big picture approach that says, here's our vision for the Rockies. Here's what we want as far as protection. And likely coal doesn't have a place or a strong place in that big vision, or new coal mines at least. So I'd really like to see something bigger led through the Land Use Secretariat and not by the Ministry of Energy.
This is a bit of a loaded question, and I would imagine that every single person would have a different answer to it. But I'm not sure. I mean, I'll fight like hell for the mountains. I value the mountains. I get into the mountains whenever I can. I also recognize that Alberta does have a long history of resource extraction. And, we hear words like prosperity and economic engine, and we talk about the role that Alberta has played in Canada's more than 100 years of history, and it's quite accurate, and it's true, and it's undeniable. So I find that I want to have an evidence-driven and fair and well thought out perspective when it comes to things like mining, drilling, fracking. I want to understand as best I can. Where do you and on that front, I'm not sure that I could support, nor do I ever see it happening, a government unilaterally canceling all contracts, tearing up land leases, kicking out corporations that are employing thousands of Albertans. I mean, I think that there has to be, and you're describing it here with the land use plan, an idea to phase out certain industries, to phase in certain industries, to transition people's skills, to allow the job market to evolve. I think you get the sense of what I'm talking about here. I don't think it's reasonable, nor do I think it's responsible. I think it would be devastating for the province's reputation with regards to investment, to just be kicking out companies that hold land leases, et cetera. How do you think, I mean, it's a big question, I acknowledge, but how do you think that this should be managed?
Yeah, and I think you're totally right. It's not about unilaterally kicking everybody out, but I think it is about really starting with that science, with that, what are the real values of this landscape? And I think, we know every policy for the last 150 years has said that the value of this landscape is water. And we also know that since the coal policy was written, we know more about the how important this area is for water and how vulnerable it is. There are many species at risk, and including our two native trout species, all throughout the Rockies. There's other economies that have built themselves around tourism and ranching and recreation now that rely on this landscape. So we really need to start from that base, and that is what a land use plan would do. What is the true value of this place, and does coal fit into that? And I would, given all of these values, I think it would be really tough to say that new coal mines are appropriate in almost any of the eastern slopes of the Rockies. And that doesn't mean that we kick out all industry. It doesn't mean we shut down things that are there. Those are all pieces that are existing and, as you say, employing people. But a lot has changed in the last 40 years since we created that original coal policy. And I think, never mind the climate change and the way the world is moving away from fossil fuels or coal-fired or coal uses. Even within the metallurgic coal, we are seeing some new technologies coming online. So I think we need to take all of that into account, not just sort of look at the coal policy, look at where there's leases and where there's exploration happening and take a marker and cut those points out and say, yeah, coal can happen there because there's coal there, which is where all the leases are. But we're going to protect the rest of it where there's no coal. I think we really need to be a lot more comprehensive and forward thinking than that.
Katie Morrison, a professional biologist and conservation director for Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, CPAWS of Southern Alberta. Always appreciate your measured perspective, your evidence-informed perspective on this. Thanks for making time for us on Real Talk. Thanks, Katie. I think we may have lost the audio. Regardless, that was a great interview. I appreciate her time. Two Beaver chimes in and says, with regards to Grassy Mountain, that's what always happens. I want to make a commitment to you, by the way, our audience. I'm going to reach out and we'll attempt to get a couple of different voices on that out of the Treaty 7, Southern Alberta, in the context of Grassy Mountain. I'd be more than happy to talk about that. We'll see if we can get them on together. Wouldn't that be great? Two Beaver says, this is what always happens, though. I want to be clear, this is an opinion comment. Chiefs take a payout in private, and the people get nothing but the mess. Which is, boy, we could get into that, couldn't we? Chris says resource extraction never leads to long-term prosperity for the region it's extracted from. The money is in adding value. That from Chris. Lou says all we have to do when it comes to mining and impact on the environment is to look north and see how the Inuit have stopped mining via blockades. Boy, then we're going to start talking about Bill 1, right? The anti-protest bill. You might call it the anti-free speech bill, depending on, everybody comes up with their own names, don't we, for government legislation. You remember C-69 was I think it was the No New Pipelines bill, which is, of course, not what it was, but that was what political opponents of it were calling it. I mean, I said that I wouldn't support the government just tearing up contracts, and that resonated with a lot of you that are saying, what are you talking about? This government tears up contracts all the time, which is, you're not wrong. Glenn says, okay, so that's a no to tearing up destructive business contracts, but yes to tearing up social contracts. That from Glenn, which is a fair comment. Mark says it has been a shell game. I note that Mark's having an ongoing conversation with another viewer. I love that you guys do this. I haven't seen the whole conversation, but Mark says our energy laws are misunderstood and circumvented. It says polluter pay federation stands for return to the rule of law in all matters energy related. Mark, who's listening in from Utah, says some of my favorite camping spots are right next to where they're doing this exploration work. Racehorse Daisy and Dutch Creeks, Livingston Falls. I wonder if Mark and I have ever inadvertently or unknowingly crossed paths at Racehorse Creek. My family loves to camp there. Karen says we've got our Protect Our Mountain lawn signs coming soon. Some random guy says my lawn's not going to be big enough for all the lawn signs. You've got Protect Alberta Parks. Now we're going to have Protect Alberta's Mountains. So the Alberta government announcing yesterday, by the way, interesting that Sonia Savage, now there's probably some technical reason why the energy minister was there making the announcement, but I know a lot of people were wondering, why wasn't the Minister of Parks, the Minister of Environment and Parks there, Jason Nixon, why wasn't Premier there? You never know. Sam, I promised that we'd leave some time before we get to our next interview to talk about this PACE funding. And this morning is just flying by. We've not yet had time because the home tour was so captivating.
It was fantastic.
And Mayor Iveson had a lot to say. And so
I would take more home tour over me blathering on the whole time.
You know what I love is we real talkers, we can be assertive. We're the types that, if we were allowed, I get a sense this audience to a certain degree might be huggers. We don't hide our feelings. We might tell people that we love them the first time we meet them. We wear our hearts on our sleeves. And I noticed that a few viewers on the live chat were invited. We were inviting ourselves over to the Moses household for a jam session in the basement. We could probably get that catered. We could see. Now, I don't know if they would like to have us all over there. I would suspect maybe not. But 2 years from now, when we're all able to hang out again, maybe we could have a jam session down there. You see a drum kit in a basement, and all of a sudden your mind starts.
I'll bring my trombone.
There are a trombone. I love it.
I like to throw that one out there because it kind of derails people.
Trombone is. I'm a big fan of Audrey Ochoa, who's a fabulous and an accomplished trombone.
Audrey's dad was one of my teachers.
Come on,
Romeo Ochoa was
Ochoa.
He's a force of nature in high school band in Edmonton.
That is one of the coolest names I've ever heard. There's another name. We got an email from a guy yesterday who says, please don't use my name in the email. Except for his name is so good, I'm devastated I can't use it. What if I say the name now, but don't read the email? And then I won't tell you when I'm reading his email. Does that sound good? Is that fair? Can I just say, just so I can say the name out loud?
Yeah, people might connect those dots.
I don't think people are going to. I don't think they're going to.
All right.
I'm going to say it. How do I not say the name Quinto Lenarduzzi?
Oh, yeah, I did love that email.
Quinto Lenarduzzi sent me an email and says, please don't use my name when you read the email. So I promise I won't. I'm not going to. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to read the email today. Or maybe I am. You're not going to know whose email it is. Is our next guest ready to rock and roll? I don't want to leave her sitting if she is.
She's logged in, but hasn't quite connected to her camera yet. So I think she's getting ready.
She's getting ready, so that buys me a minute here to ask you. I want to roll back to the NetZero home funding. Sam, not in every interview do you, and this will give us a chance to take the Uncle Sam cam, because we want to get your take on this. Why did you threw your hands in the air? You were doing the double pump when Audric Moses was talking about this PACE funding initiative for essentially retrofitting homes or for building new homes.
Yeah, I think a big part of it, if we can really just sort of unpack my story a little bit, is, I became a homeowner almost 6 years ago. And as a young person, it was like barely anything I could do to scrape down a down payment and get a home. And I live in the Inglewood, Westmount area of Edmonton here. So, an established neighborhood. My house is old. It's very not airtight. It's extremely porous and extremely leaky. It was built in 1949. But I love it, and I love the neighborhood, and I love the being in the core of the city and stuff like this. And when I first moved in, I sort of took it upon myself and said, okay, what can I do to make my house more efficient? And a lot of that was just, right off the bat, like everything was LED light bulbs, all the power switches and plugs and that kind of stuff, like swapped them all out for GFCI outlets and went around the house and did, as an individual, the most that I could do to make my house more efficient. Smart thermostats, the whole but, there's some barriers. There are things like that upgraded furnace or that upgraded power and the solar thing. And I heard that Alberta was considering a PACE program, which is Property Assessed Clean Energy. That's where the acronym PACE comes from. And effectively, as Moses explained, essentially what it is the city becomes your lender. They bankroll your upgrade. You can get your solar panels installed. You can get the costs covered off. You pay a low interest rate back to the city on your property taxes, but your property value goes up because now you have this big upgrade.
Yeah, well, you hope.
You hope, yeah. I mean, anytime you make an upgrade to your house, you're kind of gambling with property value.
For sure.
You know what I mean? But, I would suspect that if I decked out my house with solar panels and high-efficient glass and all that kind of stuff, it would be a more valuable place. And so the way the economics work out is that your property taxes get a little bit of a bump for a while, but the next homeowner inherits that and continues to pay down these assets. And the resulting economics, as he pointed out, is you either end up paying about the same as your utility bills or maybe a little bit less in some, wonderful circumstances. So I was all over this, and Edmonton was starting to talk about rolling out a PACE program. And the frustrating thing is that, when the city of Edmonton was more serious about this, I'm not saying they're not serious about this, but the conversation got stalled when the NDP government was defeated by the UCP government and a lot of their subsidies got ripped up. So there was this kind of moment where we thought we could have a PACE program with the backstop of a lot of the programs that our previous government brought in that were all about high efficiency upgrades and retrofits, because this now unlocks that level of efficiency that I can roll into my old house that I never had the funds to do in the first place.
You're just
you know what I mean?
You're just shy of bouncing in your chair. This is it's one of my favorite things about you, and I love to be able. It's one of my favorite things about Uncle Sam. But the passion that you demonstrate on things that you care about, and you're very well learned, you're very well read in this type of thing. So I think that's great. And I want to note that other audience members were with you on that in sharing their excitement. Is Talia ready to rock and roll?
Yeah, she's just getting ready to go.
Okay, perfect. I've been looking. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't I buy you a couple of seconds here? I mean, these are kind of interesting types of emails that we get. By the way, all of you that are like, you shouldn't have said the guy's name. The email's it's not a serious email. He's just being shy, but he's got such a beautiful, fabulous name. I wouldn't read it if it was like, I'm going to lose my job if I email this. Come on, guys, don't worry about it. But this one is from Jeffrey. Jeffrey's on the record using his real name, and he says, first of all, I love Real Talk because it's quite engaging. I gave some advice. I was lucky enough to be able to spend about an hour on Friday with the digital media students at Lethbridge College, and a lot of these they're the great communicators of today and tomorrow. Right? These are young professionals to be, or people that are already working in the industry. Some of them working in video editing or podcasting, and they want to know, what does this new age look like? My number one message was, I'll tell you when I find out, because we're all new to this. But a wonderful conversation. They said, what's the one thing you've got to do if you want to have a successful show? I said, engage your audience. That's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing you can control, is engage your audience. This audience engages us. You guys are on another level. The emails we receive, anyway, this from Jeffrey says, I find it quite engaging. That is the biggest compliment. He says, I'm just an average citizen. He's somewhat self-deprecating. I bet he's a swell guy. He says, I'm just an average citizen. I live in a modest house, and I make a modest living. I have a friend who lives in Los Angeles, and he says his house, the roof is just covered in solar panels. He's explained to me the many advantages of tapping into solar power. So I began to inquire about the cost of having solar panels installed, and he says, and I was quoted about $22,000. He says, so like most average homeowners, this is a prohibitive amount. To my surprise, the only incentives provided by any level of government was the city of Edmonton, about 20%. Says they'd cover me for about $4,000. He says, now to be honest, I didn't expect any incentive from this provincial government, but I was surprised to learn there were no incentives for residential solar power installation from the federal government. Now, I'm curious to know about this because I've seen some other viewers and listeners that are talking about other programs, including Julie Cusick, who says that there's more information you can find with a Retrofit Canada program by checking out Climate Action YEG. That's climateactionyeg.org. Jeffrey, might be worth checking out. He says, so here's the deal. This, though, a lack of programming seems to me to be at odds with the Liberals' constant claim that they're focused in meaningful fashion on climate change. And I'd love to know if you could have a segment of a show questioning provincial and federal politicians as to why there are no incentives for homeowners to install solar to go along with existing incentives for making homes more energy efficient. That from Jeffrey. I'm going to put this in our pile, our working list of stories that we're keeping an eye on because I do think, and we've been talking to Jake, the team behind Kubi Energy. Jake's one of the owners there, obviously, but we're going to call it our solar panel. We're going to have a roundtable conversation about solar and alternative. Yes, we are pretty proud of ourselves for that. Solar and alternative energy, and that'll be coming up in weeks to come. Our next guest, I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Talia Lavin is the author of a book that I think is going to capture your attention regardless of where you live, regardless of your political perspective or not. I think we can all agree that we have been talking about or been made more aware of white supremacy, and in particular, the events leading up to and including January 6th, the storm of the Capitol building, the unfolding of events in Washington, D.C. put all of this on our radar, to say the least. Talia is the author of Culture Warlords. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning, and welcome to the show, Talia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Hello, Canada.
Yeah, we're great. Are you coming to, you're in Brooklyn right now, is that right?
Yeah.
So this book project is remarkable. You sort of dove into this online culture of hate, basically, and you came up to an idea of how. Do we still have her on, Sam? Does she still connect?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
Talia.
sorry.
No worries. You dove in assuming different identities to get a sense of how white supremacy proliferates online communities. How did this all come about? Where did you first get the idea for this book?
Well, I've been writing about the far right for a couple of years now. I started writing about it in 2017 after Unite the Right in Charlottesville. And unfortunately, when you're a Jewish woman who speaks out about the far right, they tend to notice you. The abyss starts looking back at you pretty hard and writing nasty. I'm a pretty stubborn person, stiff-necked, and I decided that this warranted further exploration. I wanted to know who these people were and where they came from and why they were acting the way they were. It was already part of my life. And so I decided, might as well dive in deeper, I guess.
So how did you get started? You developed these personas or these online identities, and they were quite different in the sense of how they allowed you to portray yourself online. Can you take us into the process?
Yeah, I'll say the book isn't all kind of wildly gonzo. There's some history stuff and some straightforward journalism, but the reason I sort of had to manufacture these identities was because it was pretty much impossible for me to go in through the front door for the reasons we talked about earlier, just already sort of being a Jewish woman who'd been outspoken against the far right. And so when I sent inquiries to spokespeople for hate groups, they were unanswered or answered in an unprintable way. And so I created a few different identities, and I wound up trying to get a sense of the broader rank and file of these movements. Particularly, the book focuses on sort of the neo-Nazi white nationalist aspect of the far right. Although my work since has covered militia movements and other sort of aspects of the US far right. But I think actually the sort of online neo-Nazi movement is something that's relevant to Canada as well. I know, unfortunately, you've had some tragic brushes with hate with Alexandre Bissonnette and, the Proud Boys designated a terror group in Canada now. So I created a persona to infiltrate an all-white dating site, who was sort of a very blonde huntress from Iowa, i.e. not at all me. I pretended to be an incel, member of the involuntarily celibate movement, just to get a better sense of what they said when they thought no one else was listening. And various sort of male neo-Nazi and female neo-Nazi personas to get into private Telegram chats, talk to people, and occasionally expose some identities along the way.
What did you learn, or what became apparent to you early in the process? I sort of think of the concept of people, or let me just say evil, that hides in plain sight. I think oftentimes people are shocked to find out. I mean, whether you're taking a look at organized crime or whether you're taking a look at extremist groups, oftentimes, the people that hold these beliefs or people that are supporting or participating in these groups are not the people you might expect. Did you see evidence of that early on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, exactly. I think because I had been writing about the far right for years before I started the book, there was very little that was sort of, oh my God, that's so shocking to me. But a point that was sort of very much ground in day after day was the sort of banality of evil point. This idea that, I mean, I think a lot of people, I think it's a very sort of comforting narrative, but to themselves, sort of absolving people in their neighborhoods, people they know. There's this idea that every sort of movementarian white supremacist, every extremist who wants to, get all the Jews out of the country and blow up mosques and blow up synagogues is sort of an ignorant, uneducated, very poor, kind of disenfranchised person. And that's really just not the case when you spend some time in these chat rooms and on these sites. I mean, these are people from all walks of life. A lot of them are bored suburban teens, but they're people with, lives and wives and jobs and, whole sort of prosperous lives. And we certainly saw that, when you look at the arrestees from the January 6th Capitol riot, they're people, they're realtors and lawyers and CEOs who've been, revealed as having sort of been ready to hang congressmen. I mean, there's no socioeconomic bracket. There's no level of educational attainment. There's no geographic location. It's not just isolated to the South or red states or whatever that can inoculate someone from white supremacist propaganda. It's unfortunately very pernicious and very attractive to certain types of alienation and anger.
Talia, this President Biden has talked about his intention and his commitment to heal America. And, already you see evidence that may be a tall order, to put it lightly. As a matter of fact, that's a pretty insufficient way to characterize it. You take a look at the history of white supremacy in the United States. And as I tee this question up, I want to acknowledge, as you have, that Canada cannot absolve itself of conversations around exploitation and hate and all of the things that we need to talk about. Canadians are not innocent by any stretch. When you look at the United States, though, a lot of people could argue, I think quite rightfully, that the United States was built with slave labor, that white supremacy has been sewn into the American fabric for 300 years, essentially. When it comes to healing the nation, is it even possible in the context of what we're talking about? And if so, where would the president, the vice president need to start?
Well, about Canada, I mean, I would say they're sort of two separate questions a little bit. Like, I think one of the main lessons of my work is like white supremacist radicalization is really transnational. It's a global movement. There were people from Europe, people from Australasia, Australia and New Zealand, and certainly people from Canada in these groups that I was penetrating. So that's sort of a separate question to national history, although Indigenous Canadians, I think, have suffered a lot of maltreatment at the hands of the state and continue to as well.
Certainly.
But, you're right that the US is bigger, louder, and meaner in a lot of ways. And I mean, I'm not on Joe Biden's administration. And so I don't have any easy answers rooted in government. But, you can't heal a wound when you still have a, piece of jagged, rusty metal in it. It's just going to separate and, suppurate and get worse and rot until you've removed the sort of infectious agent, to come up with a hasty metaphor. So I think, talking about healing without fundamental structural change, I think is just too often it's been code for kind of shut up and stop complaining about the people who want to kill you. And, the other thing I would say is that there's a lot of talk about new domestic terrorism laws. Several states have brought sort of anti-protest bills, in essence, making, after January 6th, making penalties for sort of protest-related, damage of property, be accompanied by stiff fines and jail time. I mean, really, essentially, it's anti-protest legislation. And, as I recently argued in a piece, it's just like the police in the United States are such a huge part of the problem, not just because of, if you look at sort of recent studies, there was one by ACLED about kind of the enormous propensity of the police to selectively choose who to enact violence on in protest scenarios. And it's multiple factor, multiple times is likely to be like left-wing protesters that are the focus of violent tactics. There have been studies of, police officers on social media that show, really, really, really widespread use of racist language. And there are a lot of extremist groups in the US, particularly militias like the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, that boast a significant membership in law enforcement and the military. And so it's like asking the police in the United States to solve this problem is really fighting oil with oil. It's like, we're going to hand more money to the people that never solved the problem in the first place, like the people that saw January 6th coming and did nothing to stop it. I mean, it just strikes me that any sort of law enforcement first, solution that doesn't take into account the severe problem of radicalization and sort of far-right political sentiment in our police forces is really kind of going to be far more detrimental than it is helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, and we haven't even invoked the names of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and tragically there are thousands of names on the list of people who have died or been seriously injured in police custody. How do you begin? Canada has its own issues here as well. In the Canadian Forces, we've seen some reporting on people who have infiltrated or gone through on the record channels of taking a look at extremism in the Canadian Forces. For example, we saw an example just last year. I think it was about a year ago, of an individual that was able to get onto the property of the Prime Minister's residence, armed with a weapon, and attempt to seek out the Prime Minister, a member of the forces or a trained member of the reserves. People are starting to have a bigger conversation around the military, around law enforcement, and about white supremacy. There have been some conversations about defunding the police or reallocating police funding. Do you, or through the course of this exercise, through writing this book, did you come to a conclusion, or did your perspective change on policing and the military?
Well, let's just say I was never a big police proponent or super warlike from the start, but I think I saw the gravity of the problem. Particularly interesting was I read the Heafy report, which is the response of the city of Charlottesville, bringing in outside analysts to explore sort of the catastrophic failure of state and city police response to this gathering of white supremacists from all over the country that, again, just like January 6th, had been signaled online, was essentially planned in public, and ended in death. And, it was just total apathy on the part of the police, a combination of paralysis and just like unwillingness to act against people they perceive to be their ideological allies. And that's a huge and continuing problem. I mean, we've seen the Proud Boys, come up from nothing and then become this national gang that regularly enacts violence. There are gang laws that are exclusively used basically against Black and brown people that have never been invoked, not once, even as this thuggish gang goes around stabbing people and macing people in the middle of the streets in broad daylight. And far too often, there are many, many reports of police fraternizing with Proud Boys, fraternizing with militias, treating them essentially as deputies. So like before Kyle Rittenhouse, the young teenager who shot 2 protesters with, a gun that he allegedly illegally had obtained, came, when he was out patrolling the streets of Kenosha, Wisconsin, as sort of a vigilante against unrest. He was greeted in a friendly way by the police. They gave the vigilantes water. I mean, there was really a sense of like, that of agreement with that self-deputizing, and in militia groups that I've been undercover in, there've been, this feeling of sort of we're the backup when the police can no longer do their jobs, or if they're overwhelmed, we'll be there, as sort of a backup. And there's a real sense of camaraderie with law enforcement. And unfortunately, that sentiment is too often reciprocated. So, it's a really bone deep problem in the US. I also just just to sort of illustrate, put a button on the point in the military as well. I mean, right after I released the book, I sort of put up a post about it on Instagram. And this guy comments, the Jewish religion is that of Satan. And I look at his bio, and it says USMC, US Marine Corps, 0331. And I look, I figure out his identity, and he's a, Marine Corps machine gunner in training. So I, put that out on Twitter, put it out in public, and, he's under investigation now. But this is a guy who is being trained to use a machine gun by the United States military and is sort of openly making these eliminationist anti-Semitic comments. He had a quote from a Nazi band in his bio and a quote from Richard Spencer. I mean, this guy was not subtle. This guy was not masking it. And this guy was, being trained to operate a machine gun by the U.S. government. And that's just the tippity top of the iceberg. It's a problem that really, really runs deep in the U.S. Armed Forces and in the U.S. Police. And it's encouraged by a lot of sort of toxic institutional forces and rhetoric.
Talia Lavin's our guest, author of Culture Warlords, in the city where I'm talking to you from in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We've seen, and I hope that more have not gone underreported, but we've seen reporting of attacks, multiple attacks, separate, and who knows if they're unrelated attacks on Muslim women, on hijabi women in particular, over the past 4, maybe 6 or 8 weeks. Fatima is a regular audience member of ours. She says, I've been questioning if hijab attacks are going underreported in other cities, or if somebody or something is specifically being organized here in Edmonton. She says, to be honest, I'm terrified. There's that anti-Islamic sentiment, which is manifesting itself in violent attacks here. You talk about the anti-Semitic remarks that you've been a target of. Obviously, we're here talking about white supremacy, which can manifest itself in a number of different ways. How important do you think it is? I mean, you talk about exposing to a certain degree this U.S. Marine Corps serviceman, this machine gunner, and pushing it out on Twitter and shining light into these dark corners. How important is the public dialogue? How important is it to be exposing and talking about these types of incidents?
Well, first of all, I want to say to your viewer, Fatima, I'm so sorry that you're going through that fear. I mean, that's really awful. And, so often it's these white supremacist attacks are against, people who are visibly Muslim, visibly, Jewish, and, visibly kind of other. They go against what they see as the most visible or prominent targets. And, far-right Islamophobia is a massive problem. And very often, members of the extremist right kind of look to the Crusades as an example and sort of a piece of history they want to emulate. There are a lot of Crusader images that kind of pop up in far-right spaces online, the Templar Cross, and kind of this extremist Christian rhetoric and slogans. So, that's certainly a piece of it. There's this idea of being in sort of Manichaean conflict with Muslims, and it's tragic, and it's deeply rooted in anti-immigrant xenophobia, and it's something that's really fundamental to the modern far right. But to answer your question, I think, I'm coming from sort of an anti-fascist, not sort of entirely aligned with law enforcement perspective, jaundiced and skeptical of law enforcement perspective. And I think, therefore, that public engagement, publicly outing members of hate groups, publicly condemning this behavior en masse is sort of the biggest weapon we have of sort of driving this behavior out of the public square, is by responding to it uncompromisingly and saying this has no place in Edmonton and not in Brooklyn and not anywhere in between. That we have to, as a public, kind of rise up and remand this hideous movement back into the dark. And so a lot of that has to do with exposing it. A lot of that has to do with, taking individual members to task, and also kind of revealing groups that want to hide under ambiguous names, that want to hide under rhetoric that might seem harmless to people that aren't sort of educated. And also kind of, there's a lot of complacency towards racism in our communities. A lot of people kind of harbor sentiments that are like, oh, there are too many of them, whoever them are. And, a lot of us have these racist sentiments, and I think interrogating them, and looking at, so much of the process of the book was seeing the ways in which I was looking at the most extreme elements of the far right, but you see arguments that rhyme with theirs. You see, arguments that sort of have the same essential meaning, but are maybe diluted or phrased more politely on the political right, and then even in sort of these neighborhood associations, who might think of themselves as nice, kind people, but whose actions belie their words. So I think, routing out that complacency in ourselves and looking, recognizing that no matter where we live and no matter our education level or socioeconomic attainment, our communities are not immune to this stain. And when we see it, calling it out forcefully and seeking it out to call it out, these are things that are absolutely central to any societal response to the rise of the far right.
Talia, I have kind of mixed feelings on this. It's interesting to you tell us how you sort of you dove into the dark web, so to speak. And you infiltrated these groups, and you were able to do this investigative journalism. We see, we've got a viewer right now that says he created an anonymous account on Parler to be able to poke around and see what's going on, said it was shocking. We see people deplatform. Probably the biggest example is the former President Trump. I love people saying now former reality TV star Donald Trump, but there have been other people. More than 70,000 accounts were canceled by Twitter, and Parler itself was deplatformed temporarily or otherwise. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? People were emboldened. People with these views, with this hatred, were emboldened under President Trump to come out into the light, to come out into public, to wave their flag, to walk through the Senate halls with Confederate flags and everything else. We've seen it all. is it better to know where they are? Is it better to be aware that this exists so as a society we build our resolve? Are you concerned that a lot of these extremists are being pushed back underground under these rocks, potentially only to resurface with devastating results? In other words, acts of terror, violent beatings, etc.?
So I work with a nonprofit called Deplatform Hate that works to deplatform members of hate groups, if that gives you an idea of my thoughts on the matter. I mean, I think, people have this fear of, okay, like people won't know where they are. Well, first of all, I know a lot of people who track the far right professionally, and, they can't outrun us that easily. We know where they are. We're watching their conversations and watching what alternative services they turn to and tracking their conversations. And yes, sometimes it can be a little daunting and confusing when the sands shift, but, there are people who are researchers, who are activists, who are kind of tracking this 24 hours a day, who know where people are going. So, I'm not too worried about extremists just vanishing or the United States suddenly becoming unaware of racism. I think, unfortunately, racism makes itself felt constantly in our culture. But in the case of President Trump, I mean, I've just noticed that the conversational health of so many things is aided by, sort of not having like racist screeds shape media conversations day after day. I mean,
yeah.
I think his deplatforming has been actually quite good. And there have been studies saying that election disinformation measurably dropped after his ban from social media. I think people have compared, and I occasionally compare, banning, let's say like you identify a specific extremist and you say, okay, like, let's lobby Twitter to get you off Twitter, or lobby Facebook to get you off Facebook. Okay, then you pop up on Parler. Then Parler gets banned. Then you pop up on this streaming site called DLive making videos. You pop up on, YouTube. We lobby YouTube. Then you pop up on some other, site. You pop up again and again and again. And it's like playing whack-a-mole, right? But first of all, I would say banning people from the most mainstream platforms like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook has enormous utility in that YouTube in particular plays such a huge role in the way people are radicalized. I mean, so often it's a story of just like, I, encountered this content that was, slickly produced and sort of led me to the Jewish question or questioning the worth of Black people, or questioning, whether Muslims have a place in Western society, or, whether women should be equal or not. And it leads people down a very dark path, a rabbit hole. This is very concretely measured, but also just like in these spaces, so often the path people cite towards their radicalization starts with YouTube. And then they seek out like-minded Twitter accounts and seek out like-minded Facebook accounts and enact harassment and abuse campaigns on those sites. And also, find one another and radicalize, people who might not have gone down that path. So I think there's enormous utility in sort of taking people off the board of these mainstream social media sites because, that deprives people of a path towards radicalization. And that's huge. I mean, that keeps the movement's ranks from swelling. And then when it comes to the utility of playing that whack-a-mole, I mean, first of all, every time you whack the mole, I mean, there's some member of an audience who says, this is just too much of a pain in the butt. And I'm not going to bother seeking out whatever weird little platform you've managed to find that will accommodate your hateful views. I'm going to spend some time playing Zelda Breath of the Wild instead or whatever, and so there is enormous utility in the whack-a-mole game because every time you whack the mole, someone doesn't come back. Someone's knocked off the path towards, what could be a really tragic culmination. And so, that's what Deplatform Hate does. We identify individuals that are particular nodes of propagandistic hate, and work to remove their monetization and access to their audience. And I believe that work is deeply, deeply helpful to, like, I mean, the stakes are as high as just like the social cohesion of my country. And I do care about that.
Yeah, no kidding.
So you can check out that work at deplatformhate.org.
Deplatformhate.org. That's perfect. Talia, I'm so grateful for your perspective here. Just in closing, I know that a bunch of people are going to be ordering Culture Warlords right now on Amazon, looking for it in their favorite bookstore. What's one thing that you hope that people take from the book?
Well, it's a very angry book. It sort of comes in with a pretty uncompromising perspective about the far right, and then kind of looks at it more and more deeply, and finds more reasons to sustain that rage at how its metastasis has been allowed, and the damage it's wreaking on people's lives. And I hope that actually, I hope the book makes people just as angry as I am, and really ready to fight. To not be afraid of the word anti-fascist, and to sort of stand up to hate in their daily lives and in their country, certainly, for the protection of hijabi women like Fatima, who shouldn't be afraid to walk down the street in Edmonton, for the protection of our vulnerable neighbors, for the protection of future generations who shouldn't have to, wake up in a world moldering with hate. I hope that people come away inspired to fight, just as, I went into the swamps for you so that you would understand. And, I hope that the book, helps you come out with a raised fist. I mean, that's really the idea, is to kind of make people want to fight this societal cancer.
I love it. The book is Culture Warlords. The author is Talia Lavin. You can follow her on Twitter at chick_in_Kiev. Chick in Kiev.
On Kiev.
What's that, sorry?
Dish. It's a dumb pun on chicken Kiev, the dish. Yeah. I made that handle when I was living in Ukraine after college.
Yeah, now you've got 145. Now you've got 145,000 followers. So you want to plot out, if you're going to change it, you want to make that the right move, right?
I know, right?
Yeah.
I'm stuck forever on the chicken butter.
I love it. It's amazing. I should also mention you're the host of Moby Dick Energy, which is an amazing podcast. I listened to a couple episodes last night. Talia, really enjoyed this conversation. Deadly serious subject matter. Not everybody has done the deep dive you have, and our perspective is all much more rich thanks to the work that you've done. Thanks for talking to Canada today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and take care.
Yeah, you bet. That's Talia Lavin, the book. She's joining us out of Brooklyn this morning. The book Culture Warlords. Remarkable stuff. I want to get to some of your comments on the line. I also want to play you a video that we promised we'd play you right now. I want to remind you that it's almost Valentine's Day, didn't you know? Whether you're celebrating Valentine's Day or whether you're celebrating Galentine's Day, which I hear is when all the gals tell each other how much they love each other on February 13th, the day before. You want to shoot your girlfriends, your gal pals a special gift, or maybe you just want to treat yourself. The teams at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park have you covered with their Cupid cake, available to real talkers for $16.49. That's right, under $17 between now and Valentine's Day. And yeah, they'll have them available February 14th for those of you that are going to dilly-dally. Oh, no, dilly-dally.
I was just basking in your Parks and Rec reference there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But even the Dilly Dally might be the best Dairy Queen reference of all time.
Well done.
I'll move on. That was an accident, believe it or not. But don't dilly dally. If you do, they'll be available all the way through till February 14th. I'm shaking my head at myself. The flavors are red velvet cake, choco cherry love, and Oreo. These are two-person shareable blizzard cakes. Do we need to say any more? I don't think we need to say any more. Happy Valentine's Day from the teams at Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. The The teams at Park Power are proud to power our Real Talk RJ hashtag. They also want to let you know that right now, if you use the promo code 2021-Real Talk at parkpower.ca, they're going to shave $70 off your first bill, natural gas, electricity, or internet. They're also going to take 10% of their profits this year and plug them back into the community to charities that they care about. You can learn more on their social platforms at parkpower.ca. A big shout out to the team at Alta Moving and Storage. They know that moving can be and is stressful. That's why they're proud to help you find solutions at a local level to make sure you have a plan that works for you. That includes their pod style containers. They drop them off when you're ready to have the container moved. That's when they do it. They can even provide the labor if that's what you're looking for. You can check out the team at Alta Moving and Storage online. Just look for their logo under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. Our thanks again to Talia Lavin for joining us. It's been interesting. Were you able to, I know you've got a lot on your plate right now, were you able to keep an eye on the live chat and see what people were saying? It's been an interesting conversation, in particular about, I think, infiltration of white supremacy with regards to law enforcement. A lot of people talking like that. And then there's been a conversation coming up. I don't know how it started, but on anti-masking. And people have been talking about anti-maskers as part of this conversation. I don't think you say that anti-maskers are white supremacists or white supremacists are anti-maskers, although what we saw on January 6th would lead me to believe that these people weren't even smart enough to put on a mask when they were committing crime. But I digress. But it'd be interesting to see the Venn diagram there on that one.
Yeah, I think you can connect those dots a little bit because, you know, when masks kind of became a bit of a political statement, like, that came from the far right. That was emboldened by the fact that Trump refused to wear a mask and told people that if they did wear masks, they were weak. And he had this, you know, I'll call them an army in waiting, this various disjointed connection of loyal supporters, a lot of whom are like full-on white supremacists that would be glad to sort of pick up his mantle and run with it. So I think that Venn diagram is going to have a very tight overlap in the middle. Certainly not all far right people and not all anti-maskers, but they're both they're both a real strain on our society lately, and in various different ways.
Colette was watching the interview and says Talia made such great points. Scott says when it comes to deplatforming, who's deciding who is to be deplatformed? Like, is it Jeff Bezos with Amazon who deplatformed Parler, right? Is it Mark Zuckerberg on Facebook? Scott says, I'm not sure I'm on board with that. This is a conversation that I'd love to have. I'd love to have a Zoom call with Real Talkers to basically get like 300 or 400 or 500 voices on this if we could make it happen, have a town hall on it. Because I think we can all agree.
We have that technology.
We do have the technology. It would be interesting to do. I think we can all agree that some people, when their voice when they have that megaphone and their voice is going out to tens of millions of people, it can have a detrimental effect. We can also have meaningful conversations around things like censorship. People will want to talk about freedom of expression. Where do you draw the line? Where are you crossing the line? I think it's a fair conversation to have. Tyler says deplatforming works. The fewer massive platforms that welcome radicals, the better. I mean, to a certain degree, how do you argue against that? Tracy says the anti-mask group, even in Edmonton, that protests down at the Alberta legislature every weekend, are going underground with their bad selves. Tracy says, I guarantee it's going to take a nasty turn now. Speaking of anti-maskers, you may have heard yesterday, RCMP, Parkland County RCMP, actually executing a warrant and making an arrest. The pastor of an Edmonton area church, as a matter of fact, in Parkland County, was arrested yesterday after the church congregation continued to gather, and by the way, continues present tense to gather despite warnings from Alberta Health Services, despite warnings from police. The RCMP swearing charges yesterday after we went off the air against James Coates, who's the pastor of the Grace Life Church. Charges in contravention of the Public Health Act for being over capacity, failing to adhere to physical distancing requirements. He's due to attend provincial court in Stony Plain on March 31st. I guarantee this won't be a last incident for him. The RCMP confirming that in December, a violation ticket issued to the pastor in December, that is, on February 7th. Again, the pastor arrested and released with a court appearance date. Now, we wanted to show you, this is video that's readily available online. Because we have a show that's a little bit different in the sense that it's not as time sensitive. Typically, a news outlet would show you a 9-second clip or a 13-second clip. I want to show you about 3 minutes. And I want to show you, and I don't want to comment on it too much. I want to let the video speak for itself, but this is one of the members of the pastoral staff at the church. It's not Pastor Coates. It's not the man that was arrested yesterday in Parkland County. It's one of his team members at the church, and she's going up to make announcements. Now, this is from just this past Sunday's service. It's like minus 30 outside. It's freezing, and there are law enforcement officers. I believe they're bylaw officers there. She talks about them. You'll hear. So there's law enforcement there. And there's an Alberta Health Services representative there as well. Probably would rather be home with their families on a Sunday. I don't think they're congregants. They're not members of the church. It doesn't matter. Here's how they handle it at the church. Now, I want you to keep in mind, if you're a member of a faith community, or even if you're not, the type of attitude that you would expect from a faith community. In other words, what would their faith leaders, I'm not talking about the pastor, I'm talking about the person who has their painting hanging up on the wall, in this case, Jesus Christ. I want you to sort of give me a sense of if you feel that Christ is being channeled through this attitude. There's some weird underlying themes here, and there's some weird connotations, but I promised to let the video speak for itself, so I will.
Okay, before we get into the announcements, we need to pray. We have Community Peace Officer Robert Moore. If you want to write that name down, feel free. And Community Peace Officer Christopher Linney. Not that they're watching, but in the event, gentlemen, that you are watching, I'm looking at you. God has his hand on this place. His grace covers us and surrounds us like a shield. His favor goes before us. Bring it. Bring it. I was respectful and very pleasant, and I even thanked them for doing their job. I said, I appreciate you guys, especially on this cold morning, out here doing your job. You're just doing what you're told. I said, and I apologize on behalf of anyone who's harassed you for doing your job. But just as you are doing what you feel you're called to do, so are we. That's what I said. And for Megan as well, she's the AHS representative that has been visiting us. But you know what, it's interesting. Stephanie said to me this morning, and I think she's right, I think we're winning her over. I really, really do. She's, I thought about it, even as she was talking to us out in the hallway there, telling us about her kids and her husband making breakfast for her kids and the hockey teams that they support. I thought, wait a minute. Okay, that's not official discussions. That's pretty personal. I think we're winning her over, but we still need to pray for. So Christopher Linney and Robert Moore, we're upholding you in prayer. We ask that God would bless you and your families, and he would protect you as you're out doing your job. I don't envy that job in the least. Not ever, but especially during these times. And if there's any way, Father, that there can be favor upon their next steps, we thank you for that. Guide their hands, guide their hearts and their minds as they formulate a plan to whatever their next steps might be. Thank you, Father. Okay. Ooh. Tuesday prayer here at 7 o'clock. I'm going to tell you guys again, the reason that God's hand of favor and blessing and provision has been so abundant on us lately is because of the ground that we're tilling on Tuesday nights. If you haven't been part of that, well, you get to come on Sunday and reap the rewards, but let me exhort you to come and till the ground on Tuesday so that we can reap the rewards together on Sunday mornings. 7 o'clock on Tuesdays here. Walk through the Bible, Romans, Friday mornings, 10 o'clock. It's here in the church, or you can join online. That works too. It's not quite as good. I've done both. Usually I have to work, so I'm not here, but it is very, very in-depth and very life-giving, so I encourage you to be part of that.
So there you go. There's about 3 minutes from the announcements of this church on Sunday. It's, I've seen the video before, obviously, and so I was watching our live chat to see if it was resonating with all of you. That was from Grace Life Church. It's available online. And that was from just this past Sunday. That was from a couple of days ago before the pastor was arrested. Law enforcement even waiting until the end of the service to arrest him, not interrupting the service. And I know police were pointing that out. A lot of people were saying that they probably should have been arrested ahead of time. Naming the law enforcement officers. If you want to write those names down, she says, you go ahead. One of you on the live chat said this is just dripping with passive aggression. It's just dripping, and this pastor getting up or a member of the pastoral staff anyway, getting up and essentially saying grace surrounds us like a shield. So bring it, she says to law enforcement and to Alberta Health Services staff that are there. Not only are they gathering, you remember this, people will say, well, we have freedom of religion, and so we need to be able to gather on Sundays because it's so important to us. And also on Tuesdays and also on Fridays. And she notes that we could do it online, but it's way better in person. Here's what people were saying on Twitter. Sam, I pulled just a couple of these. Obviously, there's probably going to be some people that will defend the congregation's right to gather, but not everybody. Here's what some of you were saying yesterday. Meg said to me, you need to fine everybody in the room. Like, forget about just the pastor. Wheel lock their cars and have them towed. Enforce mandatory testing and quarantine to everybody that goes there. Remove the kids from in-person school. Meg says real consequences would get results. How about this from Dale Oldman? I suspect not his real name. Dale says they should have locked the entire site down with all the, he says, cult followers inside as a mass quarantine site. This church was a massive petri dish, just like cruise ships, and should have been treated just like the cruise ships were, locked down for 14 days. That from Dale Oldman. On our live chat, Heidi says this is exactly what Chrissy Stroop said to you, Ryan, in your interview just a few days ago about evangelicals being persecuted and enjoying the moral superiority that they take from that. Eileen says it's a global pandemic. What don't they understand? Tracy says, okay, so if you're religious, you're above the law. Okay, cool, she says. Craig has an amazing comment that I can't read. If you're on the live chat, you can see it. Mark says, my church does services online, and it's absolutely perfect. Lou says, if any of the listeners believe what they're hearing, I have some holy water for sale. What are you? Who's the guy with the mirror? Peter Popoff. What, Lou? Are you trying to cut Peter Popoff's business off at the knees? That guy's been doing great business with his miracle spring water for years. That guy's been making millions of dollars for years. Others of you say if you've ever learned about the Branch Davidians and David Koresh, this is eerily similar. That from Scott. Fatima back on the live chat says Islamic law states you're required to follow the law of the land you choose to live in. And Muslim faith leaders are bound by the faith to never break the law. I mean, I've not been a student of the Quran. I'll take your word for it, Fatima, but I can tell you I know that the Bible says the exact same thing. And if all of a sudden Christians are totally cool with civil disobedience, they're going to have to change their tunes on a lot of other things. Let's point that out, right? I know a lot of Christians that want to see a lot of people arrested. I think back to Black Lives Matter. I think back to Indigenous protests on railway lines. Boy, were you calling for arrests. All last year you wanted to see people in handcuffs. Tracy says, I pray God hands to these people the wish to stop being so selfish in thought and less angry in their decision. Hope says they're looking for power through fear. I don't know if I really expected to reach a conclusion on this, but I thought that it would be insightful to take a look at that video and get a sense of where that church is at. They are defiant, Sam. And I tweeted yesterday that I support the pastor being arrested and I support charges laid. What I lament is the fact that this is only going to turn him into a bigger celebrity. People are going to donate more. People will continue to defy the health orders. And the question is, as a society, what do we do about it? You know, somebody asked me a question, which is a fair question on Twitter yesterday, and said, how do I know that my kids aren't going to school with their kids at a public school, and these kids are rolling in after gathering with 300 or 400 people, you know, defying these health orders? This is something that doesn't just impact this church congregation.
Yeah, and the answer is you don't know if your children have been exposed. And I think that's the scary part. You know, it's we talk about schools being a little bit of a vector for spread, and there's a lot of science here. But, you know, so much of I think the assumption that we make when we're keeping schools open is that people are following the rules when they're not at school. We're not planning for the student who was at a 300-person church on Sunday morning and then rolls into class the next day and probably won't necessarily infect their classmates, but infect their parents.
Because there's a good faith element to this, right? Like there are, and we touched on this briefly with Mayor Don Iveson, which I guess now was like 2 hours ago, and we will wrap up the show, I promise, because everybody's got to get on with their days. But it's a huge conversation around reopening the economy and lifting some restrictions in the midst of the flare-up of new variants of COVID-19, right? If I were to talk to a business owner that would say, we are desperate to be able to reopen our doors because we have lost everything or we're soon to lose everything, people could empathize. People could understand why these people are desperate to do business. At the same time, we talked to Dr. Lenora Saxinger, an infectious disease specialist that comes on the show and says these new variants are way more contagious. These could, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but to paraphrase, this could bring our healthcare system to its knees in the next couple of months. And I will say that people may be eager to support their favorite business. For example, a brewery or a restaurant or a retail store that's been shuttered and closed and just limping by and tapping into lines of credit and second mortgages on their home. And they're trying to do all this stuff. And you may want to go support them, and you say, okay, they can only have 6 people at a table at a time if they all live together, and the tables have to be 2 meters apart. But what are you assuming when you walk in there? You're entering the premises in good faith that everybody in there has been playing by the rules, that everybody in there has been doing what they can to stop the spread. And if somebody has been in a church where nobody's wearing masks, and really, here's the thing. I mean, if you don't buy into it, you don't buy into it at all. So yeah. I doubt that the people at this church are passing joints around, but there are people passing joints around and sharing cigarettes and drinking from the same, hey, try this caramel macchiato. Have you ever tried? And they're drinking from this, and they're not playing by the rules. And if one person heads into a church where they're passing around collection plates or using door handles or whatever, and then one of those people goes to this restaurant, then all of a sudden you've got an unmitigated outbreak on your hands. And this is what I'm most concerned about. These are not the church congregants limiting their influence to the church congregants. It's way more than that.
Yeah, because I think they'd like to make an argument of saying, well, this is just contained within our community, so like let us practice our religion and let us stay alone. And you know, I think back to my very practicing Catholic mom who was excited to watch Christmas Mass in her living room this year. She actually thought it was really cool. She watched a cathedral in New York instead of going to her usual church. You know, when I think about situations like this, I think there's a huge chasm between the countless business owners that I know that try to run their bar or their restaurant or their brewery or just their store and bend over backwards to do everything they can to keep everything clean and safe for their customers. And then you have a situation like this church that mocks the safety violations, right? Like there's such a huge distance between there's a small element of risk going to this business, but we've done everything we possibly can to keep you safe, to the rot free-for-all of having people just do whatever they want in a church because they believe it's their right, and damn anybody who gets sick because of it.
Yeah. Kim says, I don't know why there aren't more fines and arrests. And Kim says, I demand an answer. I understand where people are coming from. You know, like Gilles says, you know, this is a fairly large church, and my wife is terrified of these types of events, which risk her life every day when these kids come to school because they're unmasked because they're 6 years old. You know, many of you are pointing out, I'm sure that, you know, some of these kids are homeschooled. I don't know about that. Gilles goes on to say, if they don't buy into this, they won't buy into anything at all. Schools, daycares, sports teams can become super spreaders. Jody says this exact conversation is why teachers need to be protected. Eric says, I had this conversation with a friend of mine. While I can trust some people to be diligent with mitigating spread, I simply do not believe that everybody else is acting in an appropriate manner. Eric, that's where I'm at. I want to be back. I want to be back in restaurants. I do. I'm relatively well known in my social circles for supporting houses of hospitality as much as I possibly can. I love being out and about. I miss the mixing and mingling and socializing, but I simply cannot bring myself to get to a point where I trust everybody in the room. All it takes is one person that doesn't buy in.
And you're probably like me in that you trust the business owner. You trust the staff.
They're doing
you trust
everything
the
they
people running the
can.
place. You don't trust the other patrons.
You can let us know what you think about this. We've hit 11 o'clock, which means Sam goes into time and a half now, which is just prohibitively expensive. The show cannot afford Sam at time
Wait,
and a
I'm
half.
allowed to claim that?
I mean, no. But we're going to let you get on with your day, Real Talkers. We love you guys. We love that you come and hang out with us, that we can talk about the tough questions. Sometimes we'll mess around about the stuff that barely matters because we take our minds off the serious stuff for a minute. And sometimes we get right back into the subjects and the subject matter that we know matters most to you. I want to let you know that coming up on the show tomorrow, we're going to be getting back into our question of the week. We've got a couple of guests you're not going to want to miss, and we are just a few days away from our roundtable with the strategists. That's right. They're going to hang out with us. It's going to be a good one. Make it a great Tuesday, and we'll talk to you again soon.
The good old